This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. I sometimes say that this programme is as much yours as mine, but that is a little facetious, isn't it? Because if I stop talking now, what the heck is going to happen? You see? So it is more my programme than yours, but without you, there would be nothing. There would be no show. The idea of me coming on air at 10 o'clock in the morning and giving it 3 hours straight is, extraordinary. Occasionally quite tempting, depending on what the news agenda has to say. But I have to tell you that today, and it won't be a topic, but it arrived in my inbox at 2 minutes after 10, and I find myself got sort of stopped in my tracks a bit by Lorraine's text. I'll just read it to you and then we'll crack on with the show proper. Maybe if the media spoke about the dead asylum seekers coming in the small boats in the same way that they are reporting on the yacht disaster, the attitude of the public would be more compassionate. Every life, she concludes, is equal. 4 minutes after 10 is the time. I have a rule. And it's not, I don't want to sound like one of those people who's got a sign up in the office saying you don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps, or wears a sort of white leather tie with piano keys on it. I don't want to go down that route today, but I fear I may already have done so. But I do have a sort of rule that when I ask you why you don't care about something, it doesn't really work. In fact, there is a corollary to that rule, which is when I ask you why you do care about something, it doesn't really work that well either. And do you know why that is? It's because my job is to provide the focus with which you can then make a really thoughtful and substantive contribution to the programme. So the vaguer my question, in many ways, the less satisfactory our exchange can be. It doesn't always work like that, but I've been doing this job for long enough now to have some sort of vague inklings about what works and what doesn't. And it struck me some time ago when I was in the middle of a, of a suboptimal radio phone-in. It struck me some time ago that somewhat counterintuitively, if I ask you a vague question, the wider the goalposts, oddly, the harder it is for you to score. There's an analogy for the ages. So you need focus, and that's why, hey, tell me what you think about this. It works sometimes. Let's not be silly. There are no hard and fast rules, and sometimes, you know, the distance between the goalposts delivers such a wide array of responses that it's fascinating. But generally speaking, on politics, especially domestic politics, it's a bit like saying, why do you like cheese? And then you'd think, wouldn't you, there'd be loads of interesting answers to why do you like cheese? But there won't be people who, oh, it's really creamy. Oh, I really like... But if you say, why do you like Stilton? You'd get a very different... why don't you like Stilton? Do you see what I mean? Does that work? I mean, is that a helpful analogy to do the cheese? Why do you like cheese? And then you run into that Paul Whitehouse character that we mentioned yesterday. One who goes, oh, on crisps, brilliant. So if you focus in on... you could probably get worked up about a flavour of crisps, right? What did I see yesterday? Chicken doner kebab flavour crisps in Sainsbury's. I think, what is... You see, I'm getting worked up about it. But you can't get worked up about the whole aisle. Unless, I suppose, you're in America and you for the first time and you notice that they don't sell packets of crisps anything like a digestible size. They only sell crisps by the kilo. You find yourself in America buying yourself some lunch in a supermarket. You think, I'll just get a packet of crisps, or chips, of course, as they like to call them, somewhat strangely. And you go to the crisps aisle, or the chips aisle, and you can't find a packet. All you can find is a sack. All you can find is like a wheelbarrow-sized portion of chips. But I digress. So what's your favourite cheese? No, I'm joking. So if I go in on a specific, it generally yields more interesting fruits than going in very vague. I'm going to read you a list of names, all right? Ready? Think of them as crisp flavours. James Cleverly, Priti Patel, Kemi Badenoch, Tom Tugendhat, Honest Bob Jenrick, and Mel Stride. Those are the 6 contenders to be the next leader of the opposition. A job that is of paramount importance. In the nature of British domestic politics, desperate attempts by much of the media to inflate the importance of people who can go for decades not even getting elected, and when they do, they waltz into Parliament with a single-figure number of seats. The leader of the opposition is a profoundly important figure in a functioning democracy. There have been many times over the last few years where I have wondered quite deeply whether or not we are currently, or were currently, a properly functioning democracy, largely due, of course, to the role that the media has played in ensuring that the electorate is not informed. Can a non-informed or an uninformed or an ill-informed or a misinformed electorate truly be said to be delivering democratic decisions? I suppose 2016 is the best example. A number of people that voted for things that they were never going to get but truly believed that they were, to me at least, describes a democratic deficit, the likes of which this country has never seen before. But the leader of the opposition is a crucially important role. And given that the current government faces all manner of problems, mostly inherited, of course, but some, if not yet, then soon to be fairly described as of their own making, the role of the leader of the opposition in particular, and the opposition in general, in holding the government to account becomes absolutely essential. And yet, I couldn't give two figs who wins this leadership battle, and I do this stuff for a living. I recognise everything I just said to you, I mean to the bottom of my heart. It is supremely important. But looking at that list of names, looking at the political landscape in general, looking at the history of our parliamentary democracy, I can't quite get my head around the fact that I couldn't care less. I thought I would. I've even placed a bet on the result, which is, without giving too much away, 99.9% certain to fail. But it hasn't worked. It hasn't injected any excitement. I mean, Suella Braverman is not standing for the leadership of the Conservative Party, a politician who I feel individually embodies much of the malice and poison that has dominated right-wing politics in this country since probably 2015, 2016. You'd think there would be a sigh of relief or an exhalation of excitement attached to the fact that somebody as toxic and as unpleasant politically as Suella Braverman has removed herself from the field, leaving, and I'll run through the list again, James Cleverly, Priti Patel, Kemi Badenoch, Tom Tugendhat, Robert Jenrick and Mel Stride. So the question that I'm building up to, as you've probably worked out for yourself by now, is why don't we care? Why don't we care? Is it a reflection of the individual inadequacies of the candidates, or is it a symptom of a broader malaise? But we'll get to that in a minute. What I want to touch upon first is the sort of polar opposite of this position. In many ways, the person I would like to speak to most today is the person who passionately cares. Tom had a caller earlier, a Remain voting, right of centre, patriot, for want of a better word, someone who cares about the condition of the United Kingdom and therefore can't really go along with what his party, as a lifelong Conservative, has become. So I want to create a sort of off-ramp, as it were, or a lane up the side of the switchboard for people who really do care. And it may be that I've got this completely wrong, and the side road will end up dominating the conversation. But my instincts are that you don't care either. And here's where I have to provide the focus, because, as I said 6 or 7 minutes ago, why don't you care is not a helpful or necessarily a fruitful question. I want you to really think about why you don't care. I want you to zone in on some or all of these people: James Cleverly, Priti Patel, Kemi Badenoch, Tom Tugendhat, Robert Jenrick, Honest Bob Jenrick, and Mel Stride. Why don't you care which one wins? Especially if this is a party that you care about. I haven't had a conversation yet about the existential threat that the Tories find themselves in, partly because they've got racist liars to the right of them and they keep seeming to tack towards the racist liars, and partly because Keir Starmer, for good or for ill, has moved the Labour Party so far to the centre and therefore to the soft right that it's hard to know what space the Tory party inhabits moving forward. So that might be part of your analysis, and you may not have clocked it yet. The reason why I don't care, and this is why, in some ways, speaking to traditional Conservative supporters, it is important, because you may not have clocked it yet, but perhaps the reason why you don't care is because subconsciously you've arrived in a place where you don't think it matters. What are the big leadership elections of our era? I don't think I was going through a particularly anarchy period of my life, because the chaos with which we've lived since 2010 was still on the horizon. But I remember when David Davis had been anointed as the next leader of the Tory party. And then they went to conference and David Cameron delivered a decent speech without notes, which everybody got very excited about. And he kind of, at the time it was reported as if he'd gone from nowhere to overtake the leader. But Michael Howard, the leader who'd lost the last election before that leadership race, had wanted Cameron for the job, to the point where Cameron and Osborne had been put together as a sort of dream ticket, and Michael Howard, along with people like Daniel Finkelstein, now sits in the House of Lords, of course, and writes the column for The Times. They were very much the architects of that ticket. So the idea that something has come out of nowhere is often not true. A clean skin is missing from this battle, right? There's nobody there who you could say can successfully detach themselves from what has gone before. That might be part of it. But then you have the leadership election when Ed Miliband stood down, a leadership battle of such epic importance that in many ways it cleared the road for the chaos and the madness that followed by putting, whether you liked him or not, by putting at the head of the Labour Party a leader that most Labour MPs didn't really have much time for. So the failure of that administration to hold the government to account or to resist the excesses of Brexit and much of what followed is of huge national importance. So the role of leader of the opposition is part of this conversation. And the other part of it is the state of our nation, the state of our politics, what this says to us about where we are. And that's why I want to know, and forgive me, because the question is going to be vague, but I've fleshed it out a little bit. Why don't you care? And make it very personal for me. You should care. Even if you don't like the Tories, even if you think they're responsible for the worst period of government that the country has ever seen, even if you despise elements of their recent behaviours, like honest Bob Jenrick ordering that murals in a welcome centre for unaccompanied child asylum seekers be painted over lest they feel too at home in that otherwise dismal environment. So it may well be that you've sort of developed a deep dislike of this party, but you should still care about who leads the opposition. So why don't you? 03456060973. Andrew perhaps speaks for many of us when he writes, from what I see, all six are a bit rubbish. Some might be slightly better than the others, but it's an underwhelming choice. Well, how come, in that case, we have dedicated so much attention and headlines and newsprint to the antics of James Cleverly, Priti Patel, Kemi Badenoch in particular, honest Bob Jenrick, Tom Tugendhat, Mel Stride? You couldn't enter a studio in the run-up to the last general election without bumping into Mel Stride. Every studio in the country he had a season ticket for. There were moments where I thought he'd cloned himself in order to simultaneously appear on LBC, the BBC and Sky News. But I don't care. I don't care who wins, and I should. So if you're feeling really meta as we embark upon this exercise in ripping up the radio rulebook, why don't I care who leads the Conservative Party? I'd like to. But why don't you care? Why don't I care? And then, of course, conversely, why does it matter to you? Why are you swimming against what I think is the tide of lethargy, apathy, ambivalence, disinterest, lack of interest. Why do you care? All right? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060973. And be as clever as you want to be today. So the simple, easy question, why don't you care? And then, why should it matter? Is a question of constitutional and national significance. And the fact that, for my money, to you, it doesn't matter, should probably be setting off alarms in corners of the country that often go unheeded. It's 18 minutes after 10. That number once again, 0345 6060973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 10 is the time. Lance, you of Ye of Little Faith, says no one will ring in because nobody cares, which is a very neat encapsulation of what I spent 20 minutes trying to explain to you at the top of the show this morning. No one will ring in because nobody cares. That is why phone-ins about things you don't care about are not a very good idea. Jeff puts it quite well as well. I would call in James, but I can't be bothered. Jeff, this is not how things work. Anyway, we shall see whether or not these predictions hold out. But it is important, and you don't care. And that makes the fact that you don't care important. Daniel's in Golders Green. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
Hi. As a former Conservative voter who cut their membership card in disgust in 2015 after 5 years of punishing ideological austerity by Cameron and Osborne, the reason why I don't care about who is going to lead the Conservative Party is because all 6 of the ghastly, awful candidates have at some point over the last 14 years been complicit in the terrible, terrible things they've done to people in this country.
Some people, given the severity of your analysis, may struggle to believe that you were a fully paid-up, card-carrying member of the Conservative Party until 2015, particularly perhaps younger listeners. So describe, if you would, the party to which your heart used to belong.
So the party to which my heart used to belong, the Conservative Party, believed in supporting people who worked hard. They believed in supporting people who did the right thing. They believed in relatively low taxes for people. They believed in a successful, prosperous Great Britain where the basics were supported. And unfortunately, what we saw over the last 14 years was a Conservative Party that waged war on every sector of society.
But wasn't austerity designed to keep the taxes lower of people perhaps like you and I, by taking money away from sections of society that had been portrayed as not really needing it?
Well, no, I just think they put a sledgehammer to everyone, James.
Yeah?
If you look
I'm
at
not
what
going to
they
disagree with you. I'm still confused about where you were before 2015. But so because I suppose you'd probably be an admirer of Margaret Thatcher.
In some ways, yes. In some ways, yes.
So the difference between a Thatcher and a Cleverly for you would be
the one that had principle and the other one had...
Well, okay, yeah, that works. The phone line's gone a bit south, Daniel, so I'll crack on. But the idea of knowing exactly what hooks these people have hung their hats on is pretty tricky. And that's why the one who I've been talking up for quite a long time as a potential future leader, Tom Tugendhat, is in some ways the one that interests me most, because I wonder how much he's polluted himself by association with what you describe, and for my money at least, not necessarily being on board with it, but for reasons of ambition or self-interest, feeling that he had to portray himself as being. But I don't know if that's fair. Maybe that's me being a bit biased. Maybe it's the curse of O'Brien kicking in. Arash is in Bristol. Arash, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Hi. It's a funny one because you mentioned just now that people aren't calling in because they don't care.
I didn't say people are calling in. There's loads of people calling in. It was Lance and Jeff who thought they were being all clever by saying no one would call in because nobody cares, which is like kind of a comedic twist on the entire phone-in topic. But there's loads of people. Phil's next in Cardiff, Karen's in Chippenham, William's in Alloa, Martin's in Bishop Stortford, Hamish is in Tring, Louis in Brentford. So don't worry about that. God, it's gone too meta, Arash. Why don't you care? Or why do you care?
Well, I'm an ethnic minority, and the last sort of 15 years have shown me that I can't afford not to care, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, but you've never had, I mean, to really generalise brutally, I don't think there's ever been a leadership election for the two main parties where ethnic minorities are so well represented.
No, that's a plus to the UK, and I guess you see the increasing demographics of where ethnic minorities are increasingly larger size of the UK population. But I guess my point is that I consider myself a young person.
Yes.
But now,
don't we all? Don't we all? Don't we all?
And I've grown up with sort of Tory austerity. I remember when I was in college and they took away my student allowance and not being able to eat, and parents going away as well. It was a difficult time to grow up. Which is why I joined the Labour Party. And I guess what I'm trying to say today is it's not just apathy towards a Tory leadership election. It's apathy towards all political parties, especially around my generation.
Yeah.
Yes, the Labour Party won a grand thumping majority last time, but you look at the turnout, and I think it's one of the lowest in UK history.
Yeah, very shallow majority, which doesn't speak of huge levels of engagement. Your generation being the absolute apotheosis of that phenomenon. I don't want to I mean, it's a pretty vague phone-in already. I don't want to make it even vaguer by turning it into, why don't you care about politics, man? Because you clearly do, but you're just disillusioned as opposed to apathetic with the major parties. Absolutely.
I mean, I was a card-carrying member of the Labour Party since the year 2010, and I cancelled my membership in last year, November. Purely because it's just, I'm not inspired, not just by the Conservative Party, but the Labour Party, Liberal Democrats. Maybe the Greens are probably most inspirational for my generation.
If I were to take one element of this, and let's take the Labour element, so you feel that they are letting you down or not delivering, then in a sense at least, the job of leading the opposition should become more important to you, not less.
Well, it comes down to trust and trust in politics. And what we've seen over the last 5 years is there's a significant degradation of trust in politics. We've had Boris Johnson and his Trumpian rhetoric and, let the bodies pile high.
Yeah.
We had Dominic Cummings, who's the sort of shadow puppet master behind many of the...
Well, I wonder where you were going with that. Don't extend the syllable shh on this programme, please. It gives me a fit of the vapours. It gives me the heebie-jeebies. No, he was an absolute character.
He was. And we've even seen Keir Starmer come in and not fulfil some of his pledges when he was running for the Labour leadership election. So it's just... And ultimately... Sorry, go for it.
No, fair enough. I mean, it's not necessarily what I'm looking for, but it is what I asked for, isn't it? It's the idea that this is not specific to the Conservative Party. It's a broader malaise, a broader sense of disillusion. So you don't care, if I'm understanding you correctly, you don't really care who leads the Labour Party either at the moment.
To be honest, not really.
Interesting. Even though you were a card-carrying member until November last year, so no one can accuse you of being disengaged. That if Arash speaks for significant portions of his generation, that is again, that's teetering on the edge of constitutional crisis, an electorate that just doesn't think politics makes any difference anymore. And in some ways that speaks to what we were describing earlier, except that as the Tories apparently determined to tack ever further to the right in pursuit of an ever shrinking constituency, a Labour Party moving in that direction as well leaves a lot of people behind who wouldn't necessarily describe themselves as being excessively left-wing. Phil's in Cardiff. Phil, what do you reckon?
Morning, James.
Hello, Phil.
Yeah. My lack of interest, if you want to put it that way, in the Tory election fight is driven by a feeling that I have. You talk a lot about facts and feelings and the important difference. The feeling I have is it's the wrong fight against the wrong enemy by all six candidates. I think it's six.
Yes.
And that's before you get into any of their respective personalities. I think they feel that they have to fight, to put a name on it, the reform.
So they're looking to the right all the time rather than looking to the centre.
Whereas they've just lost to a centrist left party.
Yes.
And they've lost big time. And what I find weird is that historically the Conservative Party has been an election machine.
Yes.
They galvanise resource. They probably bring in whoever it is from Tufton Street, and they have their expert campaigners. Where are these people now that are unable to give them some simple realities about why they lost? And I suspect it's too hard a pill to swallow. That there was a poor Brexit deal. Sorry to bring that in.
I hope you're being ironic. You get a bonus point for bringing Brexit into any conversation on this programme, especially if you beat me to it.
I am.
Well done.
Yeah. Well, I've mentioned facts and fiction as well, and feelings. So
yes.
I'm on my bingo card.
You certainly are.
But they're just not fighting anything that the mainstream population are interested in. You can talk about the facts of the number of boat crossings and people on boats relative to the total population, and yet it has a disproportionate significance in how they fought the last election.
And they seem to be focusing on the people who apparently wake up every morning and go to bed every night, absolutely obsessing about people in dinghies crossing the English Channel, and that most people are not. I think you've nailed something here.
People with disproportionately large mouths,
yes,
but still only have one vote, like the rest of us. Thank goodness.
Are they disproportionately represented among the 170-odd thousand members of the Conservative Party, I wonder? I suspect not, I think we...
No, not on immigration, I suspect, but possibly on, what you could call turbocharged capitalism, which factored in austerity and the preservation of low tax, particularly for the already well-off.
This is brilliant, but the problem with it is... I mean, if you make a brief list, Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, war on woke, Rwanda, stop the boats, things that they have...
Well, Boris Johnson also depleted the candidate list that you're now looking at.
Yes, of course he did. Think who could be on that list if were it not for the cull by Boris Johnson and that enormous shadowy figure Dominic Cummings that the previous caller alluded to. But the only problem,
instead of just yes men.
Yes, you did. You had your Greaves and your Rory Stewarts, your Soubries. You had all sorts of interesting characters with a little bit more backbone perhaps than this lot, because what we don't know is how many of them were fully signed up to this programme of nonsense and unpleasantness, and how many were sort of holding their nose and going along with it. The problem with this analysis is, that's why I read that list, Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, woke, Rwanda, is that we think, and I agree with you, that they can't really mount a plausible, substantive, sympathetic leadership campaign without disowning almost everything that they have backed since 2015. Or certainly since 2016, even for the ones that voted Remain. But that can't be how... Yeah, so maybe some Tories, some engaged Tories who still don't recognise the awfulness of Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, the war on woke, the Rwanda policy, or the stop the boats obsession. They're the only people who are engaged in this, and you and I wonder just how many of those people there actually are.
Yeah, and they've got to form some policy and some strong statements, even if they sit maybe in the same centrist area as the current government, some strong policy about the economy, about health, about education, which are far bigger ticket items than this fringe loudmouth noise that we get.
I like that. I like that analysis a lot. I mean, you probably knew that I would, but I'm not alone. Mr. P's been in touch to say, Phil doing Cardiff proud there. Nice one, Phil. What a happy place this show could be sometimes. Here's Thomas Watts with your rather belated headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:36 is the time. Do you know, I think Phil in Cardiff it's going to be hard to wrest the crown from his head this morning, because what he's done is introduce us to the question, or remind us perhaps of the question of who might have been on this list were it not for Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings having to get rid of everybody on the Conservative benches who was prepared to publicly tell the truth about the so-called no-deal Brexit. So the names that most often appear are probably Dominic Grieve, David Gauke. Rory Stewart came a lot closer than people realise, even when Boris Johnson was tilting at the biggest windmill of all. But there were a lot more as well. Philip Hammond, essentially deselected within weeks of being Chancellor. I'm not suggesting he'd be a shoo-in for party leader, but that breadth and depth of experience and or talent, depending on your personal views of these people, was absolutely obliterated, wasn't it? Because Cummings and Johnson couldn't deal with the truth. To paraphrase Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, they couldn't handle it. So James cleverly... should we do this again? Because in many ways the question it would be, what on earth have the Tory party done to deserve this leadership battle? All animals are born rubbish, but some are more rubbish than others. James Cleverly, Priti Patel. I'm going to do little anecdotal memories off the back of each one without checking any notes or Google. So James Cleverly, who jokes about giving his wife a hypnol, is that right? Priti Patel, who has secret meetings with foreign governments while in the cabinet and chooses not to tell the UK Prime Minister. Kemi Badenoch. I mean, where does one start? Tom Tugendhat, who kind of went along with all of it while casting himself as someone who found it all a little bit distasteful. I haven't got a negative personal anecdote about Tom Tugendhat. Honest Bob Jenrick, well, I mean, I've already mentioned the murals that he painted over because he thought that life was too easy for unaccompanied child asylum seekers. There's also, of course, the engagement with the property developer, with the guy that used to own the Daily Express, the details of which temporarily elude me. And then Mel Stride, who was essentially telling people who were unable to work due to illness, whether physical or mental, that they were just sort of malingering layabouts who needed to pull their socks up too sweet. So what on earth did they do to deserve this? Answer: Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, culture wars, war on woke, Rwanda policy, stop the... But answer: they governed. And all of these people are, to varying degrees, very tightly allied with the last 2 or 3 governments. Who was it? Was it Nadeem Zahawi? Who was the one that wrote the article praising Boris Johnson and then had to get it taken down from the Daily Telegraph website about an hour later because Johnson had decided not to stand against for that sort of comeback role after Liz Truss had been... I mean, the more you talk about it, the less mysterious it becomes. Anybody even vaguely associated with what's happened since 2016... The arrogance you would need to think, do you know what I'd be good at? Prime Minister. So, staunch supporters of some or all of the following: Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, war on woke, Rwanda, stop the boats. Staunch supporters of some or all of those things and individuals, concluding that they should be Prime Minister. 10:40 is the time. Daniel is in Crouch End. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
I'm afraid I can't... Hiya, mate. Good morning. I'm afraid I can't top Phil. I think he's nailed it there.
Very strong contribution, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's great. What I would say is I've always cared about the Tory party's leader since 2016 because Brexit changed everything for me. I became really engaged politically after that event because it was so seismic and I couldn't believe what the country had done. So I was kind of glad when Theresa May got the nomination because I saw her as like the most moderate, and the reason I don't care... Well, she was, but history will judge how significant that was. I know, but the reason I don't care this time is in a nutshell because Penny Mordaunt isn't running, and she's the only one who could have beat Starmer.
Do you think she could have done?
Yeah, probably. I think she might have done. I think she...
But she'd be subject to all the things I've just said. She would be allied with some or all of Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, woke, Rwanda, culture wars,
I know. But
stop the boats.
I know, you're right. But, I mean, if you look at, like, for example, the image of Trump just after the attempt on his life, and that spoke 1,000 words, and it would have won in the election. Now, this isn't the same kind of thing, but the picture that was taken of her holding the sword at the coronation in the right-wing media and in the press and everything, that was a very strong image.
No, you're right. Whether it should have been or not, who knows? I've got. I'll see. Was it actually a sword, or was it something a little bit more obscure? Was it a sword, or was it something a bit more arcane?
I think it was a sword.
Was
she
it
held
a sword?
It for ages.
And everyone was very impressed by the fact that she... I did quite a lot of gardening this weekend, Daniel. I don't know whether you're a keen gardener. And the muscle tone you would need. I struggle to keep a rake aloft for more than sort of 5 or 10 minutes. But she was the muscle tone she must have had in order to keep that sword. Indeed, it was a sword, a very ceremonial, fancy look. I mean, it looked a bit like Excalibur, in fact, which added to the...
She looked like the Lady of the Lake.
But I will see your sword, Daniel, and I will raise you this.
stand up and fight for the freedoms we have won. Against socialism, whether it is made of velvet or iron. Have courage and conviction, because when you do, you move our countrymen, our communities and capital of all kinds to our cause. Stand up and fight, because when you stand up and fight, the person beside you stands up and fights. And when our party stands up and fights, the nation stands up and fights. And when our nation stands up and fights, other nations stand up and fight. And they stand up and fight for the things upon which the entire progress of humanity depends. Freedom. That is what conservatives do. That is what this nation does. Have courage. Bring hope. Stand up and fight. Stand up and fight. Thank you, conference.
She's a bit mad.
Yeah, I've heard that speech before. I did wonder who wrote it. Was it Basil Fawlty? It was a bit mental.
No, I think it was AI, actually. But who knows? Maybe that is precisely the sort of vim and pep that is missing from this leadership battle. And I think she was polling very, very well with the members, wasn't she? I don't know what she was calling. Does she want us all to stand up and fight, do you think? I've kind of lost my thread in the middle of that. I think she wants us all to stand up and fight. I got a message earlier saying from Jim, he said, no way is there anyone called Hamish in Tring. Because I read out a list of the people on the switchboard that were waiting to talk to me after Lance and Jeff suggested that nobody was waiting to talk to me because nobody cares about the subject that I'm conducting, asking you why you don't care about the subject I'm conducting. Well, we will find out after this whether or not there is indeed someone called Hamish in Tring, because according to my switchboard, he's up next.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:46. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Rose writes, we don't care because it doesn't matter, James. I tried explaining it to my daughter that we're at least 2 leadership campaigns before the Tories become a serious party again. We haven't reached Ian Duncan Smith, and you're expecting William Hague. Yeah, I mean, that ties in with the early caller, was it Daniel, about the ruthlessness of the Tory party as well, because Ian Duncan Smith never fought an election. The Tories realised what a kiss of death he would be among the population, so they got rid of him before he could even fight a general election and replaced him with Michael Howard, who I think saw his role as damage limitation and setting up for the future. Certainly after his defeat in 97, 2000. Well, anyway, after his defeat, there's a book you can read to get all the detail. After his defeat, he hung around to ensure a sort of passing on of the baton. And indeed, to ensure that there was stability. I don't think Rishi Sunak could be accused of sticking around to ensure that there is stability in place when whoever succeeds him. So Rose is probably right. And I wonder whether, to marry Rose to Phil in Cardiff, I wonder whether the next viable leader of the Conservative Party, the next leadership battle about which we care, because we should, but we don't. The next one that we will care about is the one that actually involves either a successful detachment from the disasters of the post-16 period in particular and the post-2010 period more in general, or an actual repudiation of them, an actual admission that, for example, Boris Johnson should never have been Prime Minister. Priti Patel, a very passionate supporter of Boris Johnson, an actual admission that Brexit was a disaster. Most of these candidates very passionate advocates of Brexit. I don't know which ones get sullied or polluted by the Liz Truss associations, but it's all there, isn't it? I think Cleverly does. It's all there, and yet they're campaigning by saying, vote for more of what's gone before, because they cannot at the moment successfully detach from it or repudiate it. 10:49 is the time. Hamish is in Tring to prove to Jim that there is such a thing as a Hamish in Tring. Hamish, what would you like to say?
There is, and I exist. Good morning, James.
Good morning.
I think your question about do we care and do we have a viable opposition to the current Labour government is the answer is we don't care. And I think that's because we do have a viable opposition right now, and that's Reform. Reform have done more in their short tenure in Parliament to lob grenades at the leaders in the Labour Party, and for all of us to sort of follow, I don't know, the Farage riots and things like that, than the Tories have done in the past 5 or 6 weeks.
I understand the point that you're making from the Tory critique, but I don't think Labour are going to be particularly troubled by what you've described.
No, they're not. They're not. What would really bother Labour, because the Tories can't really throw stones at any of Labour's policies as well, it's not going to be about policies the next election or even the election after. It's going to be about truth.
Yes.
The biggest damage the Tories have done over the past 14 years is they've taught us all that lying doesn't matter.
Yes.
And if they were really smart and really clever, they wouldn't try and take on Farage and become more nasty and talk about migration and immigration and woke and all that sort of stuff. If they were really clever, they would go and look over their left shoulder at the Liberals, who did a fantastic job in the election, 71 seats, and try and form a coalition. Now, these are really big words, these.
Yes.
It's a very complicated thing to do, but just imagine if the remnants of the Tory party chose to put their individual careers to one side, elected a leader and did the deal behind closed doors and dropped the word Tory for the first time in 130 years, dropped the word Liberal and form a combined new party and call it the Truth Party or something like that. They would have over 200 seats. And
but wouldn't they need Labour to be liars for that to work?
Everyone will be caught out lying. There's, we all know.
Not in the way. Listen, if it does transpire, I'll put my hands up and say so. But they're not going to lie in the way that a Boris Johnson lied.
Correct. They won't. But correct. You're right. It doesn't have to be the word Truth Party. It could be the Honesty Party. It could be the Transparent Party.
But in many ways, you've given us the sort of nuclear option of what I was noodling around before you came on, which is a clean break with what has gone before.
Correct.
And that can't be. There's no way that a clean break with what has gone before can be led by James Cleverly, Priti Patel, Kemi Badenoch, Tom Tugendhat, Robert Jenrick or Mel Stride. So we're in William Hague territory.
Correct. They are proving that they're a dead party with these candidates. If they were clever, they would bring someone out from the shadows, someone internally.
And that's where the ghost of Phil in Cardiff appears at our shoulder, because they got rid of them all.
He's got a point, a really smart point.
They got rid of them all.
Or go and invite Ed Davey to try and pull something together. And just be really clever and smart and completely catch Labour out. They would be very plausible. They could throw off the past. They could rebrand themselves, drop the names. I mean, the names mean an awful lot of things.
Well, that's an interesting one, and as I think we both know, quite fanciful. Albeit, if we lived in a universal objectivity, it might work, but it would be like abolishing the pound for some people. It might make sense on paper, but the emotional attachment would be unthinkable. And yet, you add to the consensus that the big mistake is probably tacking further to the right, while obsessing about Farage, even after he stabbed. Over half the country considered him, so some research published yesterday by Savanta, considered him to be personally responsible for the race riots that we've seen up and down the country, and still they seem to chase those ghoulish unicorns. But also, my favourite bit of the analysis today is the... I'm not surprising, really, when you consider I've written a book called How They Broke Britain, but their inability to detach themselves from the breaking of Britain. Now, who could have done that? It's a bit boring to always go for the same sort of three horsemen of the apocalypse, but a David Gork, a Dominic Grieve, or a Rory Stewart, the kind of characters in which who had no home in the Tory party post-Brexit, once the lie of no-deal Brexit was inflated, the debasement of truth that Hamish describes became absolute, it became complete. It's bad enough when you're campaigning, of course, the 350 million quid on the side of a bus, the lies about Turkey joining the European Union, the lies about them needing us more than we needed that, all of that, and campaigning for election or campaigning for referendum, but that kind of goes with the territory. Keir Starmer could be accused of that, is correctly accused of going back on pledges he made when seeking election, but to bring That's why they say that you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. What Johnson and Cummings got away with for a couple of years was governing in poetry, i.e. lying, telling people what they wanted to hear from the dispatch box. And in order to get that over the line, in order to keep that afloat, they had to get rid of all the people who were prepared to tell the truth in their own party, which is why they're now left with a choice between James Cleverly, Priti Patel, Kemi Badenoch, Tom Tugendhat, Robert Jenrick and Mel Stride. Martin's in Bishop Stortford. Martin, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. First time I've called you.
Welcome, Martin.
And I have to say I loved your book.
That's
kept
very
me
kind.
saying, you and Rory Stewart, between you, magic.
Thank you.
A lot of the points that have gone before were things I had in mind. I felt compelled to call you because I've been wondering why I feel so sick about this this current competition. I think having just had the election, we're all fairly sick of the Tories, apart from the ardent ones, all fairly sick of the Tories, the racism, the sleaze, corruption. And since Labour have been in, they've continued with the rhetoric, really.
Yes.
You see it every day. The contenders all have fallen, and you summarise that really well after the news. It's like moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic, isn't it?
Yes. So this would be the inability to detach from what has gone before, or even to admit anything. I think honest Bob Jenrick claims that the immigration policies didn't go far enough. But Kemi Badenoch is unlikely to come out and say, do you know what? Concentrating on culture wars when I was supposed to be a government minister, in retrospect, was probably a bit of a mistake. She's not going to do that anytime soon, is she?
No, absolutely. But they've all gone astray, haven't they? I mean, I remember Kemi Badenoch saying that she came to this country when she was quite young, and then the birth certificate turned up. She was born in Wimbledon Hospital.
I don't know if that's true. I haven't got the details in front of me, and I would expect to remember that if it was absolutely on the money. We could talk about how in July of this year, The Guardian reported at least 3 officials working under her had experienced bullying in the Department for Business and Trade, which is something she, of course, has in common with Priti Patel, whose many scandals included bullying. And that's the point about impunity, isn't it? These people, their records are with the exception perhaps of Tugendhat, their records are littered with unpleasantness and scandal. In Mel Stride's case, it was political unpleasantness, talking about poorly people in a very pejorative way. But for the rest of them, there's proper scandal there, proper unpleasantness, and they still think, in the modern Tory party, they still think that doesn't disqualify them from leading, and they're probably right, and there's the problem.
Well, we still have a problem with trust with them, and yesterday a few of them were talking about unity, but they're quite different, and I can't see them getting any unity. The main point I wanted to make, and I think it's been sort of hinted at and explicitly perhaps before, is that I don't believe any of them will make the next election.
No.
I just have there's no doubt. I think it was Rose that said 2 or 3 away, and that could well be true, because they're all tarred with problems in the past. They supported Boris Johnson, they supported Liz Truss in various ways, tweets saying how great the mini budget was.
But we're possibly presuming that ruthless election-winning machine is still operational. It's just in hibernation at the moment, but any minute now it's going to come roaring back to life and will do to whoever wins this battle what they did to Ian Duncan Smith and prioritise victory over absolutely everything else. What if the stuffing has been knocked out of the party to such a degree that machine just doesn't exist anymore? It happens. The parties wither. It happened to the Liberals. It happened to the Conservatives in Canada. It happens.
James, I remember hearing an interview. It was on LBC, I think, with Angela Rayner.
Yeah.
And it was a couple of years ago, so it wasn't directly tied up with an election. But she said when we lost that last election in 2019, it was so bad, we had to go away and really look at ourselves and really think about where we were going to go. They came back, and I don't think the Tories are doing that at the moment. They're too busy fighting for number 1 spot.
Yeah, and they are fighting over the same dishes, aren't they? Or they're offering up the same menu. They're just different versions of the same menu. There is no real reflection on the scale of that defeat. You're absolutely right. There you go. You see, I know it sounded a little bit like a "you don't have to be mad here, but it helps" introduction to the programme this morning, but I think we justified that conversation with the quality of contributions. Not including myself in that. Every caller has brought really thought-provoking and insightful comments to the table, concluding with Martin in Bishop's Stortford. But there are bigger problems from our point of view, the time we spend together every day, is how do you critique a government that can't really be held responsible for anything yet because it hasn't been in power for long enough? And we'll have a crack at that in the next hour when we turn our attention to the prisons and the criminal justice system and the very loud creaking noises we can all hear.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Listen, let's be grown up about this. The potential crisis facing the criminal justice system, somewhat annoyingly for people who do what I do for a living, can't really be blamed on the people currently running the country. For example, if you think that sounds wrong, then you're a bit silly, to be fair. I hope you'll allow me to say that to you, but you will realise you're being a bit silly when I tell you that the last time that so-called Operation Early Dawn was triggered was back in May of this year, when capacity in men's prisons in England and Wales fell to below 300. So the creaking of the prison system in particular and the criminal justice system in general was in place when Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. But there is an obvious necessity for, if not blaming the people in charge for some of the things that they have inherited, then at least getting a full and clear picture of exactly what is going on and how bad things are. So reasons to be optimistic, for me at least, and you are, as ever, always welcome to pick apart all of these thoughts in the usual ways. Reasons to be optimistic, to me, would include the fact that Keir Starmer was a widely well-regarded Director of Public Prosecutions. Well-regarded enough to be given a knighthood by a Conservative government, in fact. And that means he probably knows more about the criminal justice system, in which he used to play an incredibly integral part, than I do. Or indeed, dare I say, than you do. Or than Billy Bunchernumbers with a bulldog in a Union Jack bow tie as his avatar on Twitter does. Just a thought. Which is why the question of how big a deal the simultaneous imprisonment of violent rioters, racist rioters, of 500 people now charged by the CPS over the violent disorder. Evidence suggests that certainly the ones that plead guilty will be finding their way to jail very, very quickly. More prosecutions set to follow. National Police Chiefs Council said that there's been more than 1,000 arrests in connection with violent disorder. And the current Director of Prosecutions has made it clear that he wants to see the same pace and scale of justice sustained. The problem is, of course, that the system can't sustain it at the moment, which means that Operation Early Dawn needs to be triggered. It's been in position for a long time, and it kicks in when prisons do not have enough space. It delays defendants being summoned to a magistrate's court until a prison space becomes available. Now, in many cases, that will leave them on bail, but they were on bail before. It's, if you like, a delay. It's not the case that they would be locked up, but they're going to be at loose. They're just going to be at loose for longer as they wait to come to trial. The prison service, the courts and the police then look at which defendants can be transferred to courts to ensure that there is a space for them if they were to be remanded in custody by the judge. And then they will stay in police cells or occasionally be released on bail. That's after the judge has made a decision on whether or not to remand them in custody. It is stated as a matter of fact that no prisoners who pose a risk to the public will be bailed. But people who have served their sentences as part of a different policy will be released a little earlier in order to help free up spaces for the people waiting to go to jail, including the ones who are currently subject to Operation Early Dawn. I agree with Ken when he says we need the secret barrister on this one. Indeed, we do. Few people explain these matters better than the secret barrister, but by dint of their anonymity, it's impossible to book them for this programme unless... In fact, we did once. No, we did it for the podcast, didn't we? We recorded it with a different voice. Did we do that in the end? Yeah, we did do that. 8 minutes after 11 is the time, but it's a right palaver. It's a right old palaver doing that. But sometimes, certainly since I got back from holiday, and then the riots overtook us, really. But I have to do this. I have to say to myself some mornings, what would we do if the last lot was still in charge? How would we approach this conversation if the last lot was still in charge? There is that difference. That I mean, from the point of view of being a citizen of this country, it's a felicitous difference. From the point of view of being someone that talks about the news for a living, it's an infelicitous difference. You can't give a kicking to the people who have inherited a system that hasn't got enough space for the amount of people that are being imprisoned. Unless you were to argue that they're still imprisoning too many people, or that the race rioters shouldn't be going to jail, the participants in violent disorder shouldn't be going to jail. But the question we would normally ask about this is, how bad is it? And who knows the answer to that? And given that much of the last hour was dedicated to descriptions of a breakdown in trust between the population and the political class, whether or not Labour deserved to be included in that or not is moot, because we had contributors who absolutely believe that they should be included in the detachment from politics, the disengagement, the disillusion, the breakdown in trust. Then how bad is it? How worrying, how worried are you that there are now fewer than 300 spaces in this country in men's prisons and a growing queue of rioters incited by people who won't be going anywhere near a courtroom anytime soon, snaking around the corner of the local court waiting to be quite probably jailed? So that's what I want to know. The country's top prosecutor has called for considerable investment in the criminal justice system. Back to the secret barrister. This isn't just about prison spaces. This is about the combination of austerity and failing to meet the needs of barristers who were prepared to go on strike, and a sort of ideological lethargy, and then, of course, COVID, creating backlogs in the criminal justice system that beg a belief. The more detail that you discover about how long people are waiting to be put on trial. And remember, when I say to you how long people are waiting to be put on trial, I'm also saying to you how long victims of crime are waiting to see justice. I sometimes think we look at criminal justice through the wrong end of the telescope. We see it all from the perspective of discussing perpetrators rather than victims sometimes. But the waits that people now have to endure before they can even come to court, that tracks back to before COVID, long before COVID. And the necessity of considerable investment, whether you believe in high levels of imprisonment or not, and I, as you know, am more of a rehabilitation supporter than high levels of imprisonment. But how close to crisis are we? Are all of us? And I think you can answer this. What happens in a police station? We did this. I think last time Operation Early Dawn was triggered with a different government in place. So I want to ask you the same question in pursuit of the same answers in many ways, because we need to know. What is it like in a police station when you've got actual remand prisoners in the cells? If I was feeling desperately irresponsible, I would ask you, is this a good time to rob a bank? Because where are you going to put me? What happens? And sometimes these questions are so big, for want of a better word, that you are almost shy of approaching them. What happens when it's completely full? 0345 6060 How plausible is it, looking at the situation now, which was bad enough before the Farage riots, but now, of course, has queues containing more people than there are prison spaces, potentially waiting to go to jail. I'll say that again. So 300 or so prison spaces. It's when it dips below 300 that Operation Early Dawn kicks in, as it did yesterday. And there are already 500 people charged by the CPS over the Farage riots, and more than 1,000 arrested in total, many of whom will probably also be charged. So I want to know three things. I want to know how bad this is. 0345 6060 973. How it affects your job as a prison officer or a police officer or a career criminal. I want to know what happens when everything is full. To which the answer is that can never happen, because we will release people a little bit early. Remember, hardly anybody serves the full sentence that's handed down by a court. But and there are concerns attached to this, but it will be mostly scaremongering that says, "Oh, I can't believe it. They're coming out 6 months earlier than they would have done otherwise." But it knocks the gloss off punishment. It possibly, I don't think people make these calculations when they're standing outside a house thinking of breaking in, but it may have some impact upon deterrence, upon sentencing. So how bad is it? How does it affect you? How much worse can it get? You know? The running out of prison spaces. And then, of course, you have the question of what the future looks like. What role, if you like, the government can play in this kind of situation. So you've got the end of the custody supervised licence scheme as well. That's been in place since October. So again, the political point scoring, although fun, is deeply fraudulent, because that was put in place last October. And that allows some prisoners to be released up to 70 days earlier than they otherwise would have been. The problem is that the freeing of criminals released with little notice for them, the probation service, or their victims has kind of reached saturation point. More than 10,000 have already been released under this scheme, but it is no longer freeing up space, and has been criticised for adding to the problems of both the released criminals, the probation service, and I think most pertinently the victims, who wouldn't necessarily know that their assailant is about to be released. That's going to be replaced on September the 10th by a sort of expansion, which will mean prisoners can be released after serving only 40% of their sentence. The figure is currently 50%. That's what I mean by it's more of a tinker than a policy. Currently 50%, you come out 50% of your sentence and you can get released. 40% if you're not deemed to be a threat or likely to reoffend, then you can come out then. And I don't see that they've got any choice. And that's my third question. Have they got any choice? What's worse? To punish people a little bit less than you would like to, or to not punish people at all? So you've got a finite number of prison spaces, augmented by emergency measures like Operation Early Dawn, which uses prison cells as temporary, which uses police custody cells as temporary prison cells, right? It seems to me that the challenge both the last and the current government face, albeit that the current government isn't responsible for presiding over the system for the last 14 years, the challenge that they face is pretty straightforward. Do you release some of the people currently in prison a bit earlier than you otherwise would have done? Or do you not send people who would otherwise go to prison? I think we're all going to answer that question in the same way, which leads me to the question I'm interested in hearing you answer. Is there actually any choice? Have they actually got any choice? So, question number one, how bad is this, according to your years of experience, either in the police force, the prison service, or the criminal justice system? I really want to speak to lawyers as well. So, police officers, prison officers, lawyers, and criminals. I mean, ideally repentant criminals, rehabilitated criminals, but people who've still got an ear to the ground and can look at what this means for that cohort of characters. 0345 6060 973. The question of whether it can get worse. What happens if it carries on? 0345 6060 973. And then, have they got any choice? Is this just a simple case of necessity until and this is what the head of the CPS is calling for today, until they've redirected considerable sums of money in the direction of the criminal justice system, which is yet another example of the need for more expenditure on public service at a time when all of the politicians, whether they're running the country or vying to lead the Conservative Party, seem dedicated to not increasing or even decreasing taxes. How are we going to pay for a massive investment in the criminal justice system without any money? So there's a lot there to get your teeth into. I'm relying upon you to do me a solid. The number you need is 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. But I guess the overarching question is, this looks really, really scary. Is it?
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 11. I don't think you really think things through when you suggest that we could put prisoners on the Bibi Stockholm or send them to Rwanda. And the Bibi Stockholm's not a prison. And deporting people to Rwanda for committing crimes in this country is A, something that Rwanda hasn't agreed to, and B, I almost certainly a breach of human rights. I remember an awful lot of people who go to prison come out again and never reoffend. The idea of being deported to Rwanda... Anyway, I presume you're either not thinking things through. There's a surprising number of people making these suggestions. You're either not thinking things through or you are being a bit silly. Let's start in Gower in South Wales with Andrea, who I think is supremely well qualified to contribute to this conversation. Andrea.
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hiya. Yes, I used to be president of the Prison Governors Association, and I have 35 years prison service, and I was a governor of 4 prisons.
Yeah, that'll do.
Okay, so our prisons have been in this crisis for years now. So whilst it's very high profile in the media, we have been teetering on the edge for a number of years. And I think from my perspective, my view, and I did write I was interviewed and I did an article on this not long before I retired, is government has an absolute responsibility to change the rhetoric on the use of prison. So we had 14 years of a Conservative government, and every time there was a public outcry about some crime, knife crime or whatever it might be, the response was, right, we'll lock up more people, we'll lock them up for longer, and we'll make it more difficult for them to be released.
Yes.
And the end result is we are where we are. And prisons, it is absolute rubbish that prisons make the community safer. Our prisons now are so overcrowded. We don't rehabilitate. We bring people into fairly brutal environments where there has been such disinvestment. We've got crumbling Victorian prisons. You read Charlie Taylor, HMIP, His Majesty's Inspector of Prisons report after report, the recent one from Wandsworth, how horrendous prisons are. And so putting people into that environment and doing nothing with them, yes, it punishes them, but they will be released back into the community, and we would have made them worse.
Yes, they'll be back before you know it.
Yes, of course. And there is clear evidence that community sentences work. So I think the government need to start saying these things, be honest. And when public opinion starts, shouting, we need to put more people in prison.
Do you know what? I mean, it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, but is it public opinion or is it pundit opinion, do you think?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, we have got a culture in this country of locking up lots of people. I mean, we lock up more people in the UK than Western Europe, other countries in Western Europe. So culturally, we seem to do it. So is it pundits? Is it public opinion? I don't know, but we have got a long history of doing this. So, I just think, government have got to kind of say, no, we need to put less people in prison. Overcrowded prisons don't work. And it costs, on average, to put one person in a kind of medium category prison, which is what most prisoners are in, heading towards £50,000 a year. So we can shout, let's put more people in prison, let's put them in for longer, let's make it more difficult to release them, but the cost to the public purse is quite phenomenal. So I think there needs to be a conversation from the government to the people about the purpose of prison and what works and what doesn't work. And we can't build our way out of this. It's like a dustbin, isn't it? The bigger the dustbin, the more you put in it. Well, I don't mean that to sound,
No, I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly what you mean.
If we have 100,000 spaces, which is where we are heading, that was the previous government, and I was very disappointed that the Labour Party, during their kind of manifesto, they were going to have the tough on crime, and they were going to continue with this. It will not work. It has to stop. And Keir Starmer, with all of his knowledge, he's the person to do it. He has to do it. We have to stop people going to prison.
You mentioned Charlie Taylor. His report published yesterday, wasn't it? The Chief Inspector of Prisons, showing that a quarter of prisoners released early from Nottingham had since been sent back to jail. So it was a different scheme introduced by the previous government, but it speaks to problems that are on the horizon. Just out of interest.
But we don't have a functioning probation service.
No.
So, when we release
That's a miracle, because Chris Grayling was in charge of it not long ago.
Well, there you go, yeah. So we have to have a probation service that has sufficient resources and trained people to supervise people.
I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish or unduly optimistic, but you mentioned Keir Starmer's background, and it does lead you to the sort of sense that if anybody gets this, anybody who's been close to frontline politics in recent years, then it would be him, right?
Yes.
How optimistic are you?
I think
I love the way you're providing your own sound effects, Andrea. Thank you.
Sorry. I think, unfortunately, political parties, whatever the persuasion, are very, very mindful of public opinion and what it means. And it would have to be an incredibly brave government to not kind of react to public opinion. And, yes, we've had the riots, which were, absolutely terrible. And there will be people, in those riots who clearly do deserve to go to prison. But I just worry that this kind of very quick response to it and putting people in prison very, very quickly, I presume it was to calm the situation and to prevent people from rioting further. But it's just felt to me it was incredibly reactive as well.
If you were still in the job, what would it do to you? How would it change? What would it have done to you if you were as a governor, not as a chair of the association, but if you were being told that there is now, you're pretty much chock-a-block, and in order to make sure that the riots stop sharpish, we're going for short, sharp sentences, or even longish, but very sharp sentencing for people who plead guilty. You'd wake up that morning and say to yourself, what, Andrea?
Well, governors would have woken up. Most of the prisons were full anyway.
Yeah.
So we could have all of these people, to try and fit them into the very, very small number of spaces. So, governors would probably inwardly groan and think, right, we're going to be full every single night now. We're going to be moving prisoners around to try and find the spaces. And prisoners that are moved right around the country away from home become disaffected and unhappy. So then it has a destabilising effect on prisons. And so as a governor running the prisons, it just becomes more difficult. And the environment is incredibly difficult. So in a prison that's full every single night with disaffected prisoners is a very challenging environment for governors to lead, to manage, and for the prison officers and the staff that work in it. And our prisons are incredibly difficult and challenging, and have been for a long time.
I don't want to say that that's reassuring, but I think you know what I mean. When my industry, when my profession turns its attention to your profession, it always portrays things as being extraordinarily bad or at crisis point, whereas what you're telling me from your perspective is that this is a flashpoint, an escalation, but it's against a backdrop of constant inadequacy and constant danger. So don't worry about the prison service coping. We just need to be doing a lot better moving forward than merely coping.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
I've got you. Final question. Of all the things that you have said to me in the last 10 minutes, what would you not have been able to say when you were still in post?
I think when I was in post, I wouldn't have been able to have criticised the current government that was there when I was in post.
Which might be part of the problem.
As a loyal civil servant.
Oh, hang on. I'm going to squeeze in one more. James Timpson.
Well,
be honest, because if I was a prison governor, I think I'd be slightly irritated by the idea that this fella who runs cobblers' shops is going to come in and solve all the problems that we've been dealing with for decades.
Interestingly, a colleague of mine, who I won't name, said, was very had a view on a cobbler.
Yes. I mean, he's done a lot of great work. He's obviously, but in a field that is adjacent to, rather than in the heart of, the world in which you inhabit. That was a good question, and you could tell it was a good question by the way that Andrea cunningly avoided answering it. Andrea Albert, to give her full name, the former chair of the president, indeed, of the Prison Governors Association, and serial prison governor. 11:30 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 11 is the time. I mean, it also sort of throws up the question of what purpose prison serves. That was a fascinating contribution from Andrea, wasn't it? The idea, two thoughts really running through her contribution. The idea that, yes, it's making headlines at the moment, partly because of the rioters who will need jail spaces sooner rather than later. But it is a state of almost constant crisis, massively exacerbated by the state of the probation service. So it's sort of four arms of the criminal justice system, all in relative disarray, but none more so, it would seem, than the prison system and the probation service. And then you've got the pipeline to court, which is completely clogged up, and a police service that is spread far too thinly, and which has replaced experienced officers with inexperienced officers in order to save money. I don't know what the answer is, and I do know that it may sound to some ears a little bit naive to suggest that you couldn't ask for a better Prime Minister than a former head of the Crown Prosecution Service. But make no mistake, that is no guarantee whatsoever that he'll sort this out. And it was while talking to Andrea that the possible problem with the appointment of James Timpson occurred to me, actually. Someone who I really admire. I want to make that clear. He's a brilliant guest on Full Disclosure, and he's done amazing work. But to make him a prisons minister, I don't know, now that I come to think about it. Why didn't they put Andrea in the House of Lords and make her a prisons minister? Just a thought, just putting it out there. 11:35 is the time. Christine's in Chester. Christine, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello, Christine.
I'm just ringing up. I am a retired police officer, and I'm just ringing up about the criminal justice system on behalf of victims.
Yes.
And how long they're having to wait to go to court. So I had a case that started in 2020, was set for 2024. I deferred my retirement, and then 2 days before we were due to go to court this year, it's been deferred again to next year. So by the time it actually goes to court, it will be 5 years.
Can you tell me anything about it? What is it?
It's a fraud involving a victim who was 83 when we started and will be 88 by the time.
And that's why it meant so much to you, because you wanted to that's all you should say about it, I think, because it is. In your own words, though, why is it taking so long?
That I don't know. That was questioned. I've had COVID. I understood the delay in COVID, although there were cases being heard during COVID, all but behind closed doors.
Yes.
I don't know. I have questioned it. One of the answers I got were the Conservatives and cuts, but ultimately, I stayed for my victims.
I know
because
you did.
I wanted to provide continuity, reassurance. And in the end, I had to go, reluctantly.
Yeah.
I had to go.
You can't be more comebacks than Barbara Streisand at this rate, Christine.
but it's failing. And whilst I do understand, the current of the rapid sentencing, etc., I do wonder what victims in general think when this is happening, and they're waiting for 5 years.
For what may be an imprisonable offence, the sort of queue for the prison is being jumped by the rioters, which sounds silly until you see it from the victim's point of view.
Yes.
Gosh, I hadn't thought of it that way round. I mean, I don't suppose you're allowed to still be in contact with the victim, are you? But they must find it even harder to understand than you do.
Yes, and and it was hard letting them go, if that makes sense. It really truly was.
Of course it makes sense.
It's and trying to keep, it wasn't just victims, it's witnesses, trying to keep it, because all of them provide the evidence, and trying to keep them on board for that amount of time without people. People have lives, and people, you're asking them people to put their lives on hold.
So what we need to do, if I marry your call to Andrea's, the idea that what we're talking about here is a moment of crisis is ridiculous. We're talking about a broken system that needs root and branch repair from the top down.
Yes.
Or the bottom up, if you prefer.
Yes.
Christine, thank you for that. And just for the record, it's clear that your motivation was the welfare of your victims, I'll call them, although that obviously might need a little bit of explanation for someone who's just tuned in. But the victims for whom you care, and I wish all police officers were like you. I really do.
Thank you.
Thank you. 11:38 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A response to some of the comments made so far from Brendan. Starmer had to act quickly regarding the riots. Dealing with mass insurrection is like attending rapidly to cracks in a dam. Failure to act would be disastrous. And this from someone who's asked me not to read their name out. Hi, James. My ex-husband was arrested 2.5 years ago, and we're still waiting for the case to go to court. He's been with the CPS for months. He pled guilty straight away. It's a living hell for innocent family members, especially for children of offenders. And Roberto suggests that those unfortunates on indeterminate sentences for minor crimes should be released. I think morally that's a great point, Roberto, but materially I don't know how much difference it would make to prison places. This is a really weird sentencing tradition whereby there's no specifics on it, and minor misdemeanors while you're in jail can see people who've been sent there for relatively minor crimes sort of stay there forever. Or major misdemeanors, I suppose, but that's what Roberto is referring to, something I don't know a lot about, but I've been reading about recently. Phone lines are open, 0345 6060973. It's the worst possible scenario from the media's point of view. There's nothing the media hates more than long, complicated answers to simple questions. Why have we got a criminal justice crime? Well, we should bring back flogging. Bring back public flogging. Build more prisons. Send them to Rwanda. The long, complicated answers would be the probation service has been driven into the ground, taking money out of any public service, regardless of what Theresa May have told the Police Federation in 2015, is going to reduce their efficacy. Morale is going to come down. I thought Andrea explained what happens to morale in a prison when it is at breaking point, when it's full to the everybody's life gets harder. Not just the prisoners, about which you may or may not care, but the prison officers, the prison governors, the whole system. And then when people are released early, they're going into a probation service that isn't fit for purpose. How are you going to get a Daily Mail column out of this? Complicated, institutional, root-deep malaise. Which is, whether you like it or not, almost entirely the responsibility of the last 3 or 4 Tory governments. How on earth are you going to get a Daily Telegraph column out of this, or a Daily Mail column out of this, or a demagogue on Question Time blaming it on the actual root causes of the problem? Chris Grayling would be in the frame for what's going on now in the criminal justice system. I don't even know where he is. Probably sailing around on a non-existent boat. So that's the problem. And I'm guilty as well. I'm a phone-in host. We'll move on to something else at 12 o'clock. But you have to sometimes stop and wonder why we don't pay a little bit more attention to people like Andrea, or to people like Stephen Parkinson, the country's top prosecutor, calling for considerable investment in the criminal justice system, or to people who recognise the ridiculousness of this churn, this constant churn of prisoners, most of whom will be coming back, or many of whom will be coming back to jail because their time behind bars has done next to nothing to improve the likelihood of them not reoffending when they get out. John Podmore keeps me up to speed on issues like this via private messages, but he's on the line today, former governor of Belmont. Honestly, you wait for a prison governor to ring into the programme. You wait years for a prison governor to ring into the programme, and then 2 come along at once. John, what would you like to say?
Well, I think Andrea encapsulates part of the problem, I'm afraid to say. Now, we've had 14 years of a clown car government, which has kind of totally messed up the prison and probation system and the criminal justice system. But we've had 20 years of mismanagement by a prison and probation service. Probation service is in a mess because it was effectively annexed by the prison service, and it's lost its rehabilitative culture. But a big thing in all of this, and this is an issue for the prison service, and you alluded to what Charlie Taylor was saying, and that's recalls. the last 3 months of last year, 7,000 people who had been released were brought back. Only about 14% of those were brought back for further offending. The vast majority, because they couldn't cope, didn't live where they were supposed to, didn't have anywhere to live.
Missed a bus.
Exactly.
I know that's a tabloid-friendly example, but it did happen. You miss an appointment with your probation officer because the train was cancelled, and there's no real recourse for explanation. That's it. Game over. Back to jail.
Yeah, and we've got to examine why is that happening. Now, the function of the prison probation service is to, yes, it takes people out of the community, locks them up, deprives them of their liberty, but it has a job to prepare them for release when prisoners are in custody. And the role of the probation service is to support them when they're in the community. Now, it's clear with a number of recalls that is falling apart. Now, Andrea can say, as a lot of people in her position have, well, it's all the fault of government, it's all the fault of investment. There are prisons that aren't overcrowded, that aren't crumbling Victorian hovels, and I used to run a Victorian crumbling, but not too badly as it happened. There was a report on Durham Prison yesterday by Charlie Taylor, has a full complement of staff, but prisoners are locked up 22 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, that's not going to... Well, I don't know. That's not about...
but that's a governor's decision.
Well, it's about the management of the prison. It's about the
specific management of the prison, not the Department of Justice policy or anything like that. It's a governor deciding. I'm asking you. It sounds like I'm telling you. I'm asking you. Is the governor deciding that's how they want to run their prison?
Well, we have to ask these questions. Why? Yes. Charlie Taylor did report on a very, very good prison. That was Oakwood, which happened to be private. I'm no advocate of private. Okay. So there are some good examples around there, but what we have is a prison service leadership which is about managerialism, which is about top-down, which is emasculating its governors, which is not allowing the good governors to prosper.
I'm going to push back here. How can it be simultaneously emasculating governors and yet allowing them to behave in two such distinctly different ways that you've just described with reference to Durham Prison and Oakwood Prison?
Well, in the private prison estate, and I know a number of governors.
Well, let's say a good prison in the public prison estate. If governors are being emasculated, how do they still have so much autonomy?
Well, it's not about if you're not doing anything. Yeah. If you're not unlocking your prisoners, that is. You see that as an easy option. Unlocking prisoners is not taking managerial responsibility. And they don't take managerial responsibility because they're emasculated, and they're emasculated.
I'm getting a bit pedantic now about the use of the word emasculated. Because you can't. For me, emasculated means you've taken away their power, their ability to make decisions. You've taken away their agency and their autonomy, and that's not quite what you're telling me, is it?
Yes. Their autonomy. Their autonomy has been taken away because very often, and the prison system will be run on what they call gold command.
Right.
So it will be obeying the last order from the centre. Governors are not taking the sorts of decisions that they could because many of them are inexperienced.
Right.
And many governors haven't been there more than 18 months, and Charlie Taylor recognises that.
Yes.
And Charlie Taylor now regularly reports on leadership and management within the prison.
He also blogs. He blogs quite enthusiastically for fans of accountability and transparency. He writes quite a lot about for no audience other than us, really, about what he's up to.
And his report on Wandsworth talked about leadership at all levels, not just in the prison, but at area manager level, at national level.
So even if it's full to the rafters, John, it could still be run well.
Yes. I mean, I've run full prisons. Most prisons are full most of the time.
Well, that's my final question before we run out of time. Alan in Faversham directs me in this way. He says, well, surely they're going to be in crisis with regards to space all the time. Unless we're running half-empty prisons, then won't there always be a shortage of space? So it's almost as if we're having the wrong, not you and me, but the country's having the wrong conversation in some ways.
Well, it should be about not having the sort of. It should be about getting people out such that they don't come back.
And that's not happening at all.
Yeah, it's like having a bath with a plug in, both taps on full, and the overflow pipe is coming back into the bath. Ugh. And we're not sort of taking that issue.
So we're back to nibbling at the edges of the issue as opposed to knocking the whole thing down and starting again. Ideologically or policy speaking, not obviously infrastructure speaking, must be incredibly frustrating for people like you and people like Andrea some of your answers won't be right, and it's often the way. But goodness me, you're going to know a lot more about it than all of the commentators, myself included, and an awful lot of the politicians as well. Just to do Durham prison justice, as everything John said was accurate, but the Inspector of Prisons, Charlie Taylor, who's someone I think we should talk to, isn't he, by the sounds of it? I love it when that pops up on a programme, that idea that here's someone who's worth talking to. He described cautious optimism for the future despite a difficult 18 months and found positive steps were being made by the new governor and leadership team to improve reception processes and provide more meaningful activity for prisoners. And there it is again. The curse of the columnist. More meaningful activity for prisoners? Oh, it's bloody Butlins. How many times have you heard the kind of commentators responsible for bringing you Boris Johnson, Brexit, Liz Truss, austerity, whispering in your ear for the last 20 years that, oh, you want to trust these people and you want to do that, oh, and blame the unemployed or the immigrants. What do they say about meaningful activity for prisoners? You want to reduce the likelihood of someone going back to prison after they've been released. Send them back into the community improved, enhanced and rehabilitated. How do you do that? With meaningful activity for prisoners. Oh, it's Pontins. What will they be doing next? They're all going to get, I don't know, cake baking lessons or something. It's so, I often, not that long ago, I envied people who did that for a career. Let's take a complicated problem and just offer up a really, really simple solution. I used to think, God, that must be nice. Imagine being able to clock off, go home and not give a second thought to all of the damage that you've just done to the opinions of the people reading your columns or listening to your show. Oh, it's a prison camp. And they are, it has to be said, also responsible for the mess that we're all in, because it is to their tune. It's what Andrea was referring to when she talked about public opinion. It's to the tune of the prison is a holiday camp, hang 'em, flog 'em, throw away the key brigade in my profession. It's to their tune that the last 3 or 4 governments have been dancing.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:52. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't know what to do in the next hour. So I like that conversation about working from home. It's one of those things that's always bubbling away in the background, isn't it? The social change that we've undergone as a consequence of widespread working from home and the anger that some people still hold towards it. One of those angers that I'm never quite sure is sincere or not. But I'm also drawn to a story about the new 3 Rs, reading, writing and rocket lollies. I may explain a little more. But what I'd really like to do in the final hour, and I'm obviously not going to, and the producer is about to have a fit of the vapours, I've just bought a PlayStation 5. It's my first console in a long, long time, and I thought we could spend an hour discussing what games I should buy. What? Yeah, Baldur's Gate 3, and then we could get into a really interesting conversation about how much games have changed in the 20 years since I was the Daily Mail's video games critic. Because I don't have the time, I didn't used to have, because my girls came along, the time or the energy to put in the huge shifts that you need to play these massive games now. But I do now have the time and the energy. Well, I've got the time. Whether I've got the energy or not, only time will tell. But now that my children are a little older and a little less keen on spending time with their parents, I could, or they would be keen to play a game with me on the brand new console, my little treat to myself. But I don't think I can get an hour out of that. I don't think it would be either professional or a particularly good listen. But do feel free to get in touch via all the other usual. I've got God of War. I bought God of War, the new God of War, and I've got the Hogwarts game as well, because I sort of kind of want to get the whole family involved. But some of these I'm going to know about already. Here it goes. There goes my inbox. I should have thought about that, shouldn't I? So don't bother texting me with any cutting contributions to whatever conversation it is that we have in the next hour, because my inbox is now going to be absolutely inundated with game buying suggestions. Let's get back to the question in hand, which is about the state of prisons. It's sort of broader conversation than perhaps we were expecting. What have you taken away from it so far? Don't panic, Pike. Don't panic about the current crisis, because it is a symptom of a much deeper malaise. Panic if you want about the deeper malaise, but you should have been panicking about that years ago. In terms of what it does to our faith in the criminal justice system, I do not know. But some people who appear to be forces for good, including the Director of Prisons, the Chief Inspector of Prisons, Charlie Taylor, I seem to recognise the need for serious systemic change, and I think Keir Starmer does as well. So watch this space. Callan is in Loch Lomond. Callan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Callan.
So I'm 32 years old now. I was caught with inconsiderate supply of drugs, Class A, Class B drugs, when I was 22 years old. So quite a while ago now. Some of the interesting things that I necessarily noticed inside was the people who had some fantastic jobs that really, when you've been caught, a lot of people think that that's it. Yeah. Once you get out, that you can go back to your normal life. You've served your punishment. The unfortunate scenario is for myself in particular. I work in IT, specialise in financial technology.
Right.
I never get the opportunity to work in that anymore because you need an enhanced DBS. You need to have all these additional checks and balances, even though it was something that happened to me over 10 years ago. It's just a no-go.
So it's too hard for you to find productive employment at a level to which you had become accustomed before you got sent down.
Exactly. And even now, I do contract work now, and the amount of people that are,
You're not a hitman. You're not a hit. You mean you do contract work as an IT professional?
Oh, of course. Of course.
Thank goodness for that.
I don't think I've got the agility to be an actual hitman.
I've got the eye-hand coordination. And that is a big problem. That's 10 years later. It's still... I mean, there's a slightly different story in the news today about childhood convictions or cautions for things like shoplifting or fare dodging coming back to haunt you if you want to work in the care sector. But that's the sort of thing you're speaking of. It's...
And when I got caught and when I spoke to my lawyer, he was like, the best thing you can do, move away from the city you live in, go to another city, find a decent professional job, and the likelihood is that you might not get a prison sentence because of your age.
So send fewer people to prison. Is the short... Callan, thank you. That's an ex-convict. We've had 2 ex-prison governors. We better squeeze in an ex-copper before we go. Peter is in Twickenham. Peter Kirkham. Peter, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James. One thing missing out of the equation.
Yes.
If you're going to lock people up, you need 2 things. Somewhere to put them, with appropriate security and people to look after them.
Yes.
The people to look after them pay a bit of overtime, and prison officers and police officers, there are people there to provide a certain amount of that. Where to put them is another matter, because as you've identified, you can't build prisons quickly. What was a little reservoir in the olden days were police cells that weren't used operationally. With the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, the police sort of contracted into fewer custody centres. So, for instance, when I was at Chiswick, we had cells at Brentford. When next door Hounslow had cells at Feltham.
Yes.
And they weren't normally used, so they could be used temporarily.
Like an overflow, literally.
Yeah, exactly. And as an added advantage, the police got brighter cars, cleaner cars, because we tended to get old lags that were sort of a low security risk. And we had one at Brentford who used to get his exercise by cleaning all the police cars in the yard.
Where was
supervision?
I have to say, when you said you got cleaner cars, I thought, what's he on about now? But it was a sort of form of a sort of homegrown DIY community service order. Where was the police station in Brentford?
It's at the bottom of, I think it's called... well, you go down Windmill Road, and you come down to where all that new development is.
Yeah.
The traffic lights with the beehive on the corner.
Yeah.
Is literally behind the beehive. It's all boarded up and semi-derelict.
No, that's what I mean. That's what I thought you were referring to. And because that's a skyscraper. That's a big block.
Yeah, it was a section house
so
as well.
people slept there as well.
We don't have anymore.
Yeah. I can practically see it from my bedroom window. And it's been boarded up forever.
It has. It's been closed for a long time. I suspect it's part of the development's next phase.
Well, someone will have their eye on it. Yes. Thank you, Peter. I was in your neck of the woods yesterday as well, actually. It is coming up to 12 noon. Sometimes we provide content that doesn't demand that you live in West London, and I shall give you a heads up whenever we do. But that's a mad thing, that police station on my patch, in that it has been abandoned for years. It's been abandoned for as long as I can remember. And it's a block of flat. It was a section house. People slept in it. Last time I mentioned it to you, it was because a couple of ne'er-do-wells had climbed up onto the roof and started throwing slates and bits of brick down into the street. This is the content you come for. In the next hour, what do you reckon? Working from home? Or the importance of teaching children things that aren't currently on the curriculum? I shall take a view. We won't be talking about PlayStation games. Sorry.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 12. Do you remember yesterday, were you listening yesterday, when we talked about a sort of ban on out-of-hours contact with your employer? Would you like to hear a very rare confession from your favourite LBC presenter? And here is Sheila Fogarty. No, I'll make a rare confession now from your... in your top 20, I hope, LBC presenters. I got it wrong yesterday. I set it up wrong. This is absolutely no criticism whatsoever of the people that called in. The calls were quite funny. The calls were quite good. But I set up the side dish ahead of the main course. The side dish would have been outrageous requests from your employer. And that, would include things like cancelling a caesarean section, postponing your caesarean section so that you could do their hair and makeup, or the other examples, including, would you mind not going on holiday next week, or getting phone calls at 10 o'clock at night, or being tracked down to a friend's dinner party and ordered to get back to headquarters. I mean, there were some fantastic calls, but I was really interested in the culture in this country, which I think is peculiar, of believing that your boss is allowed to more or less do whatever they want with you. Not criminally speaking, although, of course, not that long ago, nobody even raised an eyebrow at people in positions of seniority seeking to go out with or ask out people in junior positions. I'm speaking more about the culture we have in this country, which I think is Victorian. I was thinking about it on the way home. The Victorian nature of employer-employee relations. So post-industrial revolution, the fetishization, if that's the right word, of mill owners and industrialists and master sweeps, I suppose, if you go back far enough. The idea that the most valuable members of society are the factory owners, the people who own everything, and therefore they can do whatever they want, and if you don't like it, you can get a job somewhere else. There are exceptions to this. Is it Sea Houses in Cumbria and William Whiteley as well? So some of these employers, these Victorian and post-Victorian employers, had a real commitment to their workforce and would really, really look after them, not unlike some of the policies that Edward Timpson has brought in with his chain of various shops, where they've got holiday homes for members of staff and help with difficult times in their lives. But usually, I think what we've done in England in particular is essentially imbue the employer with an almost omnipotent status. And what happened on yesterday's show, if you missed it, is I worked out why I felt like that. I did it in the style of therapy, actually. I didn't mean to when I started talking, but you know how this show works. Who the heck knows what's going to come out of this gob next? But I worked out that because I had some perfectly commonplace but profoundly unpleasant experiences as a young newspaper reporter, I had convinced, in order to convince myself that nothing bad had happened to me and that everything I endured was perfectly normal and possibly even a positive, I end up believing that brutalising junior members of staff is a good thing. And when I arrived at LBC, and up until relatively recently, I would have been very much of the view that if you want to work from home, you can jolly well get another job, or if you don't want to be contacted out of hours, then you can sling your hook. I don't feel like paying you this week. So I was part of the problem, even though I was a victim of the culture, imbuing the boss or the owner with power, undeserved and untrammeled power. That's what I really wanted to talk about. Oh, well done, you're a genius. Titus Salt says, well, was the name of the fellow I was thinking of, who really looked, I mean, he was a bit bonkers, wasn't he? Didn't he end up dying of pneumonia because he slept in a bedroom that had no roof? He liked to, where does all this stuff come from? And why can't I get it into some sort of order in my brain? He was like a sort of Victorian industrialist who had some fairly wacko ideas, including sleeping in the open air, but at the top of a massive mansion. And then he caught pneumonia and died. Spoiler alert. So the other type of entrepreneur, the other type of post-Victorian industrialist, owner, manager, has created a culture in which even those of us who are part of the workforce think that the boss should be able to do what he wants with the workforce. And that's what I really wanted to dig into yesterday, and I failed. I let you down, I let LBC down, but most of all, I let myself down. And it's too late. We'll have to wait for another opportunity to come back to that conversation. But we can return to similar territory today, because I sort of think about the owning classes, or their shills, if you like, in the political world. Why does the right wing get so cross about working from home? I mean, seriously. Keir Starmer talking yesterday, I think, or his spokesman rather, talking yesterday, from an evidence-based position about a culture of presenteeism and burnout being remedied by stopping bosses from contracting workers out of hours. This is implementing the right to switch off, which was actually promised during the election. But they went further in conversations with journalists yesterday and stressed that the increase in working from home can also boost productivity. And it winds up, I don't want to say the usual suspects, but if Ian Duncan Smith appears in a story, you've got to say the usual suspects. It's the law. You know, if you've got a story about the Daily Mail claims that there is a backlash against something, and then they quote Ian Duncan Smith to prove that there's a backlash, it's the law that you have to say the usual suspects. So today, Sir Keir Starmer came under fire last night after Number 10 claimed a culture of presenteeism can be damaging to productivity. Wow! What? Keir Starmer came under fire? That sounds bad. This sounds serious. Let's have a look for that fire, lads. Ooh, fire. Find the fire. Where's the fire? But the comments triggered an immediate backlash, with Tory grandee Sir Ian Duncan Smith saying they showed how out of touch Labour is with the rest of Britain. So there's your fire. I mean, it's more smoke than fire, really, isn't it? We need a backlash. We need a backlash. Page Ian Duncan Donuts. Hello, Ian. We need a backlash. Certainly. What are we backlashing against? Hang on a minute. Let me check my notes. Working from home. Oh, it's outrageous. It shows just how out of touch Labour is with the ordinary working people of this country, like me, Sir Ian Duncan Donuts. And you just sort of think, mate, just once it would be nice if you said, can you ring someone else? I'm sure 30p Lee's not busy. But anyway, it shows how out of touch Labour is with the rest of Britain. And then they make a point about people who can't work from home when trying to make a point about people who do. So when they say, what about people who work in factories? You sort of think, well, yeah, this isn't about people who work in factories. Unless their home is in a factory. This is about people who can work from home. It's a bit, I mean, why would you start talking about people who can't work from home when you're having a conversation about people who can work from home? Unless you're tacitly admitting that working from home is better than working at work. In which case, why is it better than working at work? Oh, well, you're happier. You're more at one with the universe. You get more time. You can be more productive. You can be more productive when you work from home? If you're, quotes, lucky, end quotes, enough to work in a sector where you can actually work from home? Yes, but we mustn't let the people who will be more productive if they work from home because of all the people who can't work from home. I'm Sir Ian Duncan Smith. And that's the Daily Mail for you. That comment shows, he goes on, how enthralled the government is. Okay, true or false? He talks about woke culture next. True or false? It's a conversation about how working from home can increase productivity. Does Sir Ian Duncan Donuts talk about woke culture, or would that be too ridiculous even for his dismal standards? Hands up. Did he mention woke culture or not? The eyes to the right. And then, yeah, he did. All right, maybe it wasn't the biggest mystery of the day. Those in the private sector who have to work hard to earn a living and who turn up at their offices and at their factories unaware of the idea that somehow being present is somehow worse for their business than being absent. He told the Mail. That comment shows how enthralled the government is to woke culture, while being enthralled to the trade unions. Yeah, because I tell you what, Mick Lynch, Mick Whelan, they're always demanding that train drivers and railway staff can work from home. They never shut up about it. The number of times I've heard Mick Whelan from ASLEF demand that train drivers can work from home. If I had £1 for every time they'd done that, I'd be able to buy myself a peerage. So why? Why do they hate it so much? Daily Telegraph. Starmer backs working from home to boost productivity. The Prime Minister's spokesman has suggested plans to introduce a right to switch off, which could mean staff spending less time in the office. And they hate it. There's a backlash. There's fire. Why? That's question number one. All right? Woke watch. You're right, James. Not me. I'm not that. I'm talking to myself in the third person. Even by my standards, that would be eccentric. But someone called James has just texted to remind us of Woke Watch. Can we get the Woke Watch thing? I just haven't heard it for so long. I'm feeling nostalgic. I thought it might go out of fashion. And it has, really. I think, oddly, do you know why Woke Watch essentially ran out of road? It was because everybody became Woke Watch. So, apart from Ian Duncan Smith, almost everybody else now knows that if you say woke, people think you're a plum, don't they? It's like, it's woke. What's woke? Working from home is woke. Okay. What's next? So question number one, why do they hate it so much? 0345 6060 973. And question number two, why does it improve productivity? Why does it? Well, maybe we shouldn't work on the presumption that it actually does. Why or how has it affected you? Whether you're the oddest thing when this became commonplace during lockdown, where a couple of employers rang in to say I'd never allow that to happen. And do you know what I found myself thinking? I wouldn't like to work for you. What if I can prove that I am more productive when I don't have to spend 3 hours a day with my face pressed into a stranger's armpit on public transport? What if I can prove that the stress of getting to and from work, when removed from my life, actually improves my productivity? So there are two ways into this. The first is, why do they hate it so much when the people that do it quite like it and the benefits seem to be clear? 0345 6060 973. Kudos to Steve, who's texted to tell me he's woking from home. Steve's today's winner so far on the texts. But the second thing is, I want to work on the presumption that if it was bad for business, business wouldn't do it. Now, it might be naive, but I think that's what a Tory grandee would once have said in the days of what you might call responsible capitalism. Employers tell me that it is good for their business when their employees work from home. Therefore, I am in favour of employees working from home because I am from the party of business, which is what, believe it or not, the Tories used to call themselves. We are the party. So businesses like it. Employers like it. If they don't like it, they can ring me and tell me what they can do about it on 0345 6060 973. But if it is good for business, why do the usual suspects hate it so much? All right, 0345 6060 973. But the second bit is, in many ways, more important because it's about you, not about Ian Duncan Donuts. The second bit is, how's it changed your life? Like generally and genuinely changed your life. And I want you to approach that in one of two ways. The first way in which to approach that is professionally. How do you respond to the claim that working from home does or does not make you more productive? All right? 0345 6060 973. It varied a bit in the early days. I think productivity went up when everyone was new to it, and then it sort of dipped back a bit. But the general consensus seems to be that productivity improves when people can work from home. 0345 6060 973. And then the second bit is, what about your personal life? What about the things the Tories seem never to care about? As in the difference that working from home made to your relationship with the rest of your family or your friends or your neighbours or your community. The abilities that it gave you to do things that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. So I like to look under the bonnet of predictable conversations on this programme, as you know. That's why I have to use phrases like the usual suspects sometimes. when the usual suspects queue up to attack something, they are usually the people that told you Brexit would be brilliant. Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy. Liz Truss was an economic genius. And austerity was a necessary response to Gordon Brown's economic malfeasance. Brackets, please don't mention the global financial crisis. Do you see what I mean? By now, the usual suspects should have been given their sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap and shown the door. But they're not. They're phoned up by the Daily Mail whenever they need to manufacture a backlash or an under fire to a story that they don't like. So the question is, why don't they like it when we, using very loosely, when we do? 0345 6060 973. And then the second question is, how has it changed your life? What has it done to you? Special mention to Simon, who says, James, I'm so slow. I only just worked out why you're calling me in Dunkin' Donuts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 21 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien, who doesn't work from home. I knew I had a clever thing to say, but I did briefly. I wasn't mad for it. I've got to be honest. I like to see these pasty faces before me when I'm at work. I like to see these expressions of gormlessness staring back at me through the glass. All right, I'm only joking. Bit of man management for you there. But so I had a big studio set up at home, all the technology, apart from when next door was on the trampoline or when there was a particularly tweety bird in the tree outside. You couldn't tell whether I was working from home or not. And to be fair, if we made it a permanent affair, we'd soundproof the room, wouldn't we? But I didn't. I liked it. I liked coming to work. I like coming to work, but I can work from home. And if I worked from home for 6 months, maybe I'd stop preferring working from the office. I don't know, but why do quotes they end quotes hate it so much? And how has it changed your life? What's it done to you? Let's start with Melvin, who's in Ladbroke Grove. Melvin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First, I'd like to say I've probably been working from home on and off for the best part of 20 years, so it's always been a part of my working life anyway.
How come? How come?
I work in IT.
Okay, so this was one of the big discoveries, wasn't it? Remote working, being technology-based, if you work in technology, then remote working became a fairly clear option, a fairly desirable option, long before the rest of us waited for lockdown to change us.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Lockdown changed it for everybody because we've been telling companies it'd be actually more cost-effective to allow people to work from home, and managers never wanted it because they had factory mentality, basically.
They had what mentality?
Factory mentality.
Factory mentality, that's a good phrase. Yeah, so presenteeism, that it somehow, don't ask me why, but it must be better if people are there, which is sort of what Ian Duncan Smith has told the Daily Mail, also woke.
Absolutely, and we've done tests on this ourselves of like staff monitoring. When people are in the office, they tend to skive a lot more because ultimately they don't really want to be there for the whole 8 hours. So when you're at home, what you might not do is work for the 9 to 5 solid 8 hours, but the stats show that people actually log in earlier, log out later, and they do more work across maybe 12, 13 hours at their own pace.
It's a long time since I worked all day in an office, but I spent a significant part of most days in the pub.
Well, yeah, it shows. I mean, I think they've done surveys, and they show most people are only productive in the office for about 3 or 4 hours a day. So, if you're taking that and putting it across 13, 14 hours, and you do the same 4 hours, possibly more at home, and minus the cost and the wasted time of a commute, people are going to be more energized to do it anyway. I think, though, the reason managers don't like it is because actually it's more work for them. They've got to make sure they've got more mechanisms in place to monitor. They've got to make sure they've got more middle management setting targets and checking up on those targets. So it's actually more work for them. That's my view anyway.
Oh, that's interesting. I can see where that comes from, and it makes sense. Why do you think the usual suspects hate it so much? Because Jacob Rees-Mogg was on his penny farthing about it, wasn't he? At one point, leaving little post-it notes on desks and then having to be told, we've actually got more workers than desks. So what's going to happen? It's a bit like the prisons crisis in microcosm. What are we going to do? We've got more workers than desks, and you've told everyone to come back to work. Why do they hate it so much?
I purely think it's just about control. I've got X amount of people in the office. I can see what they're doing. Never mind that most people can hide what they're doing when the manager walks across their desk. But that's another story. I genuinely think it's just about a perception of control. I can see my workers. I can see what they're doing. And that's all there is to it.
There's a class thing here as well, isn't there? This idea that I kind of unpacked it yesterday, how on earth I'd ended up being on the side of the exploitative employer when I was an exploited employee, and that's I did that yesterday. That's not today's phone-in, but you can see why an exploitative employer doesn't like this until they realise it's actually good for business. So what on earth are politicians doing, wading into a space where the actual business people have told them this is good for business? And it's to do with the work-life balance. It's to do with this post-Victorian English obsession. The idea that, you shouldn't be worrying about your mental health, which of course was yesterday's programme. You shouldn't be worrying about that. You exist solely as a wage slave. And all of this stuff chips away at the notion. And in fact, a proper understanding of productivity recognises that a happy workforce is a more productive workforce. Helen's in Macclesfield. Helen, what do you think?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Well, I really think that Jacob Rees-Mogg and Ian Duncan Donuts truly believe that the working class should not be trusted with their own workload. They're all lazy, and how on earth are they to be trusted not to just be sitting in the garden
scratching their what?
Bums.
Yes, no, absolute technical term. Thank you for that. I think you're right. It is the great unwashed. It is his perception of his fellow citizens is that they're stupid enough to vote for the lies that he tells them, and their role in life is simply to make money for the higher orders, for the upper orders.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So why would we be trusted?
Crack the whip up the chimney.
Yeah, and I can't work anywhere else because I've got a daughter who's very poorly.
Oh, I'm
so
sorry.
the only way that I can be productive to the world, to the country, and not claim benefits is to work from home. So, I do that and I enjoy it because it gives me a sense of myself rather than, just purely being a parent carer.
Yes.
But without being able to work from home, I would be drawing benefits because I would have no other choice. I can't pitch up at an office every day.
You can't leave your child alone.
Exactly.
Full stop.
Yeah.
So that's an increase in your productivity. I mean, it's a textbook example of increased productivity. You're the kind of person that, Mel Stride might not have insulted you, but he would have insulted your child by claiming that, most people who can't go out every day to work are sort of malingering layabouts. You have to stay with your poorly child, therefore you cannot work at a place of work, but you can now, since the lockdown, it's even more opportunities to work from home. Ergo, your productivity exists, whereas previously it wouldn't have done.
Yeah.
That's beautifully put. But of course, the downside of this, Helen, is that there's so little time left to scratch your bum.
That's true, yeah. I don't sit outside in the garden eating ice cream every day.
Swings and roundabouts.
Where to do that.
Swings and roundabouts, Helen. Swings and roundabouts. Yeah. It's 28 minutes after 12. That's productivity. So what are they talking about? All of the people that can't leave home for reasons of their own health or their family's health can do some work from home. Productivity increases. No? Apparently not. Ian Duncan Donuts, Jacob Rees-Mogg. I don't know if we should still be talking about Jacob Rees-Mogg because he's not, the good people of Somerset made their views clear, didn't they? But on we go. Not quite got time to squeeze in Chris in Bedford, so I'll go to him first. I like to hit the news on time at least once every show. Why do they hate it so much? We're getting better answers than we did last time. It used to be I'm absolutely valid that they own all the property, and probably a caller will say that in the next half an hour, and I've got an interesting point to add to that observation about the landlords. But the class element of it, you're not supposed to have autonomy. When I say jump, Perkins, you say, how high, sir? That's the attitude that people, and it's usually the sort of fake pseudo-aristocrats, the ones that have not been born into that world, but who have desperately tried to behave as if they belong to it. People who perhaps invent double-barreled surnames. People like Ian Duncan Donuts and Jacob Rees-Mogg, the ones who are trying to sort of adopt the mannerisms of Victorian mill owners. They speak of working people or they treat working people with contempt, while, because of the dishonesty that goes hand in hand with the delusion, claim that they're actually speaking for working people by doing the divide and rule. This is pointed out by Jim Bob. It's entirely about class. Look at the middle class elite being all lazy at home while you, the working class, are struggling on. And then Dunkin' Donuts somehow manages to blame it on trade unions, as if Mick Whelan and Mick Lynch spend all their time demanding that train drivers and train guards can work from home as well. There's just, once you scratch the surface of these stories, they're all so bogus. You wonder why they're still getting the airtime, don't you? 12:30, Amelia Cox has got your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 12. This sounds like a Kenneth Williams line, but I've got parakeets in my nesting box, and I wanted swifts. I put a nesting box. The builder did it, actually. It was far too high up for me. Right at the top of the house. And I got, don't laugh, all right, but I managed to source some swift noises. So I opened the bathroom window and put a little Bluetooth speaker on the windowsill. This is the kind of thing you can do if you're working from home. I put a little Bluetooth speaker on the windowsill and I played swift noises. And I wanted to get swifts and it didn't work, and so I forgot about it, as I always do. And I was doing a bit of gardening last night, and parakeets bloody everywhere where we are. And it's still exotic. You see flashes of green, particularly when they're roosting. It's mad to see parakeets in your garden in the middle of London. But they are quite invasive. And I looked at it and I thought, there must be little chicks, parakeet chicks in our nesting box. And do you know what I didn't do? I didn't put a camera in it. You know, everyone's got cameras in their nesting boxes. I didn't put a camera in it. So does that mean, ornithologists, that I'll never get swifts now? Is that a parakeet's nesting box forever? I can't reach it. I can't, not until, I don't know, the roof caves in or something. I have to get the builders back. What can we do? I don't know. 12:34 is the time. A slight digression, but it is kind of relevant to working from home. I think about how much nicer your home is when you work from home, because you've got all that time. All the time you spend commuting, you can actually spend feathering your nest, to continue the ornithological theme of this slightly unexpected part of the programme. John's in Edinburgh to steer us back to the serious stuff. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How's it going?
Yeah, very well, mate. What do you want to say about this?
Basically, so the first thing I'd say is that I tend to find that both people, myself working, people that work for me, I find that they are actually more productive when they can work from home, and it is useful to come in from time to time, if only not to get cabin fever, so I'll say that.
Of course.
But before mentioning why I think Ian Duncan Smith doesn't like it, is it possible for everyone who interviews him ever, whenever he brings up factory workers, just to say, it's not the politics of envy, Ian, if you're going to start comparing what different people do?
That's very true, actually. They're so hypocritical, aren't they?
It's incredible. But I think the reason he doesn't like it, I think it's really simple. I think basically Ian Duncan Smith does not care for Dunkin' Donuts, does not care for...
You shouldn't snigger at my own jokes.
No.
Sorry.
Well, he doesn't care for tax. He doesn't want to tax people. What he does want to do, however, is he wants to extract as much money from your pocket as possible to go into the pockets of people who build and rent things like offices, who have shops, etc. All of that goes into pension funds. It goes into the pockets of people that he is friendly with. And in the past, that was all great. There was one major downside, of course, was that you're using largely across most of the country public transport that went into public funds to get into town. But thankfully, they found a way around that on the pretext that we would get a better service if we privatised most of it. So I think he just wants the money to come out of your pocket and to go into somewhere.
Well, there's something in that, actually. I mean, that at least is a rational response and not a particularly unpleasant response. Do you know, actually, John, just between you and me, I couldn't be bothered to read to the end of this article in the Daily Mail. I stopped when I got to Ian Duncan Donuts, but you'll never guess who pops up in the third last paragraph.
Go for it.
Jacob Rees-Mogg. It is extraordinary. It's almost as if the phrase "usual suspects" doesn't actually go far enough. So that is an economic. There's an economic logic to what you describe. You need money going over the tills of transport and of retail and of hospitality, don't you? I mean, that's where economic growth lies. Where does the conclusion come from that people won't spend similar amounts of their disposable income in the same sectors when they're working from home?
I think that's where the office building and such like really comes into play, though, because if you look at where massive amounts of pension funds are actually, or similar, are putting their money, it's in property. And you are right, because otherwise, you get back to all the problems of the high street and things like that, and how people do shopping and so on. The one thing that remained stable through all that was the explosion of new shiny glass office buildings in our cities, and that's taken a hit since COVID, particularly, but also since the advent of greater technology to work from home.
And they can't specify that, so they have to just go after working from home in general, and they'll go after the civil service because they're in their sites, but actually they're not bothered about the civil service working from home. They're bothered about all the people in the shiny skyscrapers, which may or may not, they may be personally or adjacently invested in. So they have to create a sort of negative culture. Tell me a bit about productivity in your workplace, you and your staff.
Well, it's really, as with many people, I think it was COVID that really kicked it on, because I think we were just as sceptical as anyone to begin with. It is office-based, and most of the people that we work with, they tend to do 2 or 3 days in either direction. Some people prefer to go in every day because that's what some people prefer to do. Some people don't. But what
it's autonomy. They seem to hate autonomy for ordinary working people, don't they? You should be doing what you're told. You shouldn't have any freedom to cut your own cloth in this way, even if you end up being a better employee than you were when you were doing what you were told.
Spot on. But the truth is, I think it comes down to that mix is what's been proven to work best. And you know what? See, if someone's really just treating it as a Skype or whatever else, you're only going to have that insofar as you would always have that situation. Some people will take the mickey with sick days. Some people will take the mickey in anyway. But you can't assume the worst of everyone. Otherwise, what is the point to begin with?
That's another cultural thing. They do assume the worst of everyone. Let's actually hold your noses. I'm going to read out whatever it is that Jacob Rees-Mogg. Oh, he's got a knighthood as well. Oh, my goodness me, how they've demeaned the old knighthood since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. So here he is. The government is... So why they're quoting Jacob Rees-Mogg, what is he, an unemployed... No, he's probably got a show, has he, on one of those TV stations where Farage knocks about. The government is determined to feather-bed the public sector with higher pay for idling at home. Being physically and mentally present is an essential part of work. Says a man who was so good at his last job that his employees sacked him. By a majority of about 5,000, I think, mentally and physically present. Yeah, that's the thing. 12:40 is the time. I know I went off on a bit of a mad one. I'm just checking the footage of the parakeets that I filmed last night, because Chaz says I must not have a proper Swift box because the parakeets would not be able to get into a Swift box. So, hang on, I better turn the sound off before I look at this. That's a bit odd, actually, because they're not going in and out. You've got a parakeet, because I have got a proper Swift box. It's a tiny aperture, Chaz. So what? I mean, they couldn't lay an egg through a hole, could they? So they're feeding the chicks inside the Swift box, but they can't get in and out of it themselves. Oh, it's like David Attenborough, this. 12:41 is the time. Back to working from home. See, David Attenborough couldn't work from home, could he? Couldn't make his nature document. Well, he could if he got a Swift box and some parakeets moved into it. Stephen's in Leeds. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James.
Hello,
long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome.
Basically, I think it's quite strange the approach of the Tories. I'm speaking from my experience.
Yes.
Is in terms of the trying to centralise the kind of the wealth of the country, where surely the idea of regionalising it is probably what working from home can do.
Yes,
obviously,
of course.
There is the mentality where, obviously one of the reasons maybe why they want to centralise the kind of the workforce is for their kind of their friends and property owners. I mean, speaking from my experiences, I used to, I currently do still work in London, but I work from home just outside of Leeds.
Oh, how lovely. How often do you come into the office?
I went during lockdown. I started with an agency who then mandated to work back in the office. I finished there and then decided to work for a rival just because they offered a better work from home policy. The work gets done. The kind of the productivity is higher.
How do you know the productivity? So that's not a trick question. I mean, it's probably quite an easy question to answer. How do you know the productivity is higher?
Obviously, you just get a sense of how quickly and how well the work gets done, basically. Yeah. I think it's...
And the amount of time it takes you to do the work, the amount of work you get done in the same amount of time, as it were.
Yeah, and I think also the kind of, the ability to work quicker and not have the distractions, kind of
that's counterintuitive, that. You might think there were more distractions at home. And obviously, for people in their early 20s who are living in a shared house with a bedroom, this is a very different proposition, isn't it? You have to remember that, horses for courses. But there are more distractions at work than there are at home, generally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, kind of like I say about the idea of like decentralizing where people do work, give people, again, for myself, the opportunity to engage a lot more with the community and add a wider value to the community through, kind of bringing your expertise and putting that back into the community. So, yeah, kind of like if I was commuting or if I was away from home for 3-4 days a week, I wouldn't be able to be engaged in projects that I am within the community that are then bringing back wealth into it. So, kind of, for me, it's one of these things where to centralise all of the wealth in the country in certain locations just because it brings in revenue through hospitality and through, kind of like building rents, where the opportunity to liberate that and allow people... just a kind of...
There's a lot going on here. I like it. And Martin adds to what you say. He says, companies I've worked for, James, are very suspicious of working from home until you're sick. And then they say, well, maybe work from home today.
I think that's it. It's one of those things where it does, kind of like seem ridiculous. I mean, one of the projects that I'm involved with in the local community did get funding from the Levelling Up Fund, funnily enough. And it kind of like makes me laugh about the way that works, but kind of on the other side of that, you've got certain politicians that then just want to contradict that.
And they may not even know why. And we're talking about Ian Duncan Donuts and Jacob Rees-Mogg. So the idea that they've given this lots of thought and high-level intellectual engagement before arriving at an informed and evidence-based conclusion is a little bit ambitious, a little optimistic, Stephen. But there it is. Spreading economic activity around the country, especially into parts where it may not otherwise have reached, is a good thing. It's what levelling up was supposed to be all about, albeit on scale. But the downside is that the concentration that Stephen described in city centres, sandwich shops or other retail outlets may lose trade to the point of going out of business. But the trade will move. It will go somewhere else. That's no consolation, I accept, to the person whose business has gone under because people are no longer walking past it on the way to the office every day. But I think if you filed it under progress, then people who claim to be against it would have to be, if they were to be honest, in favour of it. Mary in Wrexham asks possibly the most important question of the day. She says, James, how much would your listenership drop by if we could no longer work from home? And the answer to that question is twofold, Mary. The first bit is I don't know, actually. It's interesting. But the second bit is it's an abuse of your human rights when you're at work not to be able to listen to me. So it's very important you make that clear to your employer before accepting any new job. You say, just so you know, I will have to listen to James between 10 and 1 every day. Obviously, I'm available to take phone calls and attend meetings because now, thanks to Global Player, I can catch up on things that I've missed. But as a general rule, my productivity increases the more James O'Brien I have in my working life.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Is it Sam? Who was it that said... I've lost the text, but you think the parakeet may be trying to eat some chicks that are in my nesting box. So I've got I may post the footage. I've got a swift nesting box, which the aperture is tiny, really tiny. And I got a parakeet, but now I've watched it back again. The parakeet is just perched on the hole. It's not in the box. So Sam says, after Chaz pointed out that I should get a proper Swift nesting box and then a parakeet won't be able to get into it. And I thought I did get a proper Swift. It's RSPB approved. I really want Swifts. And he's right. He can't. The parakeet can't get in. But it's up to something. And Sam says he might be trying to eat the chicks that are in there. Where are we now? Middle of August. What chicks would be in there in the middle of all? I could just have been having a butcher's, couldn't it? And there's nothing in there, and it's just exciting. Stay tuned, won't you, all year, to find out the next chapter in James's nesting box adventures. But it's not, you're right. There's no way the parakeet's getting through that hole. I like to think you've just tuned in because you don't like me, but you really like Sheila. And you're wondering, what on earth has happened to LBC? I knew he was bad. But this is, even by his standards, this is just abysmal. Bring on Sheila Fogarty, ASA. Can't she come on early? What's he actually talking about? Swifts. It has indeed, as some of you attest, all gone a little bit North. No, it hasn't gone North Norfolk Digital, because Alan Partridge was only interested in himself. He wouldn't have given a tuppence for an interplay between parakeets and potential swift chicks in his back garden. So no, it's not North Norfolk Digital, but neither is it necessarily very good. Back to working from home. If I worked from home, I'd know what was going on in my nesting box, wouldn't I? Because I could keep an eye on it more. Alan's in Leamington Spa. Alan, what would you like to say?
Hi, how you doing?
I'm all right, Alan.
Yeah, good. Yeah, this working from home is... It's a convenience thing that now that they all want everybody to work in the office when it suits them. And I do think it's very much a control part of things. I know, that during the pandemic, everybody was panicking and everything, and the world had to change. And I think in more ways than one, we've benefited from that because people's work-life balances have been for the better.
How has it improved yours?
I don't have to commute anymore. I mean, I was self-employed before, but I work for a consultancy now. But I don't have to commute every day into an office. I can get up and start work at whatever time I want to. As long as it's before 9 o'clock. So if I'm working with clients or other colleagues, say for instance at the other side of the world, like in India, I can wake up early and I can do a bit of work, liaise with them, go and have my breakfast, go to the gym and do some chores, whatever it is, and then carry on for the rest of my day. And I agree with what one of your callers said earlier about how people log on early and log off late. And I find myself working at weekends because, I do enjoy my work, but I do what the company I work for give to me, the allowance where I can do stuff. I might have a bit of a half an hour extra lunch break or something like that. I appreciate that, so I have no qualms in working above and beyond what they're expecting me to.
There's a tension here, isn't there? Because yesterday's conversation about being uncontactable, at work not being able to contact you when you're not in work or in work hours, flies in the face a bit of what you're describing. It's almost as if everybody's a bit different, Alan, and some things suit some of us and other things don't, and other things suit other people that they don't necessarily suit us. So this really, really works for you, and that makes you a better. When you were an employee, it makes you a better employee.
Yeah, I mean, it allows. Like I said, I mean, I've got a son who's got learning disabilities, and I'm not with his mum anymore. We've got a great relationship, and I'm able to help out there.
Oh, down with that sort of thing, says Ian Duncan Donuts.
Well, he's a plonker, isn't he?
That's nice, a great use of the word there as well. We should bring that one back into fashion, I think.
And people, I think companies have got to realise that if they've got employees that love doing what they're doing, they're treated nicely, and they're allowed to have I can't attend this meeting because I've got to drop my son off somewhere. Those people are going to be so much more appreciative and loyal to that company and to the people that they're working with.
Massive majority.
Yeah, absolutely. I've known some people that work at a large retail organisation.
Oh yeah.
That they've been hired during COVID, during lockdown, on the premise of you could work from home. We need people that got your skills.
Yes.
We make it convenient for you, etc., etc. And now I'm hearing through the grapevine with some people I know that these people that work so far away you couldn't even commute on a daily basis are being told to come into the office, or maybe you might need to look for something else to work.
On what grounds? Just on the cultural grounds? It's like, we want you here. You do what we say, or you find yourself a new job. It's got nothing to do with productivity.
Exactly. And to look again, one of your colleagues, one of your callers, said earlier about the people get the work done and the logging on and logging off. You do believe me, I'm a software developer, and you have work you're allocated, and if you can't deliver that work, or you're struggling, or you have these timescales, it is very apparent very early on if you can't deliver. If you're playing Tetris or something on your computer all day and not working, it will become a pattern.
How old are you?
I know, yeah, sorry, I'm a bit old. Yeah. And it becomes evident very quickly that an individual or individuals
isn't doing the business. Isn't doing the business. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot going on here, but the bit that surprised me the most is the agency issue. Not as in an employment agency, but the agency that we have to make individual decisions, and the fact that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg don't think we should have, and the dishonesty that they deploy when they talk about somehow speaking from concern for people who can't work from home, when they say that people who can work from home shouldn't work from home. They've got no concern for the people who can't work from home, none whatsoever. They proved it every day of their careers in Parliament. Alan mentioned his boy having educational needs. I'm going to read this. I'm not going to mention any names, but I want you to know that I do my very best to take things like this on board. And again, I think 10 years ago, I'd have gone, come on, give me a break. I can't police every single word that ever comes out of my mouth. But when we talk about trigger warnings, or we talk about wokeness, or we talk about all of these things that people often pretend not to understand by claiming that, I can't, why should I have to pay it? Just think about the unnecessary hurt that you're causing in somebody else's life, and then ask yourself whether you want to carry on doing that. That's why this message caught my eye. So please can I ask you to consider using another phrase to describe someone who's less than bright, rather than not being able to tie their own shoelaces. My grandson, who is 7, is not able to tie his own shoelaces. He can't dress himself, and he hasn't moved on from nappies. He can't kick a ball well or ride a bike, even with stabilisers. He is autistic. He's bright in many, many ways, but struggles in others. We love your show, but when you use this phrase, it breaks our hearts. And I will now do my very best to improve. I can't promise I'll get it right immediately, but I will do my best not to use that phrase again moving forward, because it causes you and your family pain. And it's entirely unnecessary pain for which I am responsible. And that's why so many conversations in this industry about trigger warnings or wokeness or treading on eggshells or hypersensitivity are so obnoxious, because you're saying to this lovely person, unlucky, I can't be bothered to make the minimal effort required to stop upsetting you. But I can, so I'll try. Alistair is in St Albans. Last word to you, I think, today, Alistair. What's it going to be?
Hi, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Well
blah,
done.
blah, blah.
Blah, blah, blah.
I'm kind of trying to look at it from another angle. One, I think the main reason the Tories, or that portion of them, are kind of so up in arms, I think everyone's kind of covered that quite well. It's very much, I think, an element of control, big business being very invested in the Tory party or in the ex-Tory government, and I think that's been covered quite well. I'd like to look at it at a different angle, if that's okay.
We've only got a minute.
I own and operate a couple of small hospitality businesses, one in Shoreditch and one in St Albans.
Right.
And with the work from home movement, there's been a massive markdown in the amount of footfall and customer base for the business. So there's a lot of industries with people working from home and not being out and about that I feel are quite dramatically suffering.
And even if those people are spending the same amounts of money elsewhere, that's no use whatsoever to you, because you've got investment in that specific site based upon what the footfall was when you invested in that specific site, and that sucks.
And the site I've got is in quite a prominent central-ish portion of London, so we're based in Shoreditch. And I know a lot of friends who've got other businesses kind of in around the area that have reduced opening hours, reduced members of staff, and we're all looking at, compared to pre-COVID turnover numbers, a fall of about 15 to 20% in turnover.
Yeah, which can be the difference between washing your face and not washing your face. I don't know if you ever come across Kate Nichols, who's the chief executive of UK Hospitality.
Yeah, I do know her.
I think she's brilliant. I've had the pleasure. I judged a sausage roll competition with her not long ago, would you believe, Alistair? But she's the only person in this Daily Mail article who makes sense, and she talks about exactly the point that you make about the engine of the economy being the everyday economy, retail, hospitality. And people need to be there for that. So a nice bit of balance, a bit of balance at the end. And I'm cracking on only because Sheila's here. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Play, where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. So do download Global Player for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish standing in for Tom Swarbrick, who's standing in for Nick Ferrari. But now it's Sheila Fogarty.
That means my holiday's over, doesn't it? I'm not standing in for anybody. Thanks, James.
James O'Brien on LBC.